Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 3801, None of Your Business. Slowly, the black fist began to emerge from the black hole. Then, out came the head, followed by shoulders. A few more moments passed, and the torso and legs were also out. It was a creature that had a human-like body shape. However, his head was cylindrical, and there were 6 pairs of indents on it. These hollow spaces were shimmering almost as they were sparkling eyes. Moreover, his hands and feet were longer than those of human beings. Somehow, they made him look like a moving tree. As soon as he came out of the black hole, they felt a wave of pressure being released. This was not the sole pressure. Yet, everyone present instantly felt that he was a formidable opponent. When the snake goddess, primeval lord of heaven, and others saw this black figure, their eyes began twitching uncontrollably. He looked quite terrifying that their blood froze. As a matter of fact, they already guessed there was someone supporting the snake spirit king when they saw the black light in the ball earlier. But they were still shocked when the one working behind the scenes actually appeared. They were even more dumbfounded when they heard Zen's question. Was this creature really the one who destroyed the once mighty and invincible Four-Spirit sect? With this, the human spirits felt even more anxious and aggravated. They missed the prosperous history of the Four-Spirit sect with all their hearts. At the same time, they had doubts. The Four-Spirit sect had survived facing so many powerful existences in the main world. But why must they lose in the end? Even if the Snake Spirit King exhausted every ounce of his power, it would be impossible for him to fight with the other sects. But now, they finally understood that there was a creature working behind the Snake Spirit King. This creature's power was probably way beyond what they could ever imagine. Who was he? Where the hell did he come from? One of the human spirits couldn't help asking the question. Why did he destroy the Four-Spirit sect? What benefits would he get from destroying the Four-Spirit sect in the main world? This is unbelievable. Corbett was trembling slightly. No matter how he thought about it, he still couldn't figure out why the creature wanted to destroy the Four-Spirit sect. The monkey masters, the bird masters, and the human spirits were all curious. What could his motive be? Now, even the snake masters were confused. Why did such a creature appear out of nowhere? And more importantly, where was their king? Needless to say, the snake masters were not ignorant. They knew that the snake spirit king's incredible power came from this creature. But why did he want to destroy the Four-Spirit sect? What was his goal behind all this? Didn't the Snake Spirit King want to take a strong lead and dominate the world? If so, then why was this creature in his place? All of a sudden, they heard a loud booming noise. Ha ha ha. The black humanoid creature let out such a strange sound. His laughter could be heard throughout the entire area. The 6 pairs of eyes were focused on Zen and the irregular heavy sword in his hand. Answer me. Zen raised his voice a little. Even though the tone of his voice was eerily calm, it was still commanding. Easy, human, replied the humanoid creature leisurely. Yes. Afterward, the entire area was silent. The silence was broken when they heard a voice. Why did you do that? The voice sounded anguished and enraged. The one who spoke was a woman from the Joy House. She was so angry that she couldn't help but demand answers. It was the same question that everyone was thinking. The humanoid creature looked down. Then, one of the 6 pairs of eyes flashed lightly. Zen's eyebrows twitched as he slashed the irregular heavy sword downwards. The sword seemed as though it wanted to kill something. However, his reaction was a bit slow. So, he missed whatever he wanted to cut. All of a sudden, they heard that woman's scream coming from below. Ah, it was such a blood-curdling scream. Pain was a way for creatures to protect themselves. The treacherous beings were tough and powerful. Therefore, it was almost impossible to cause any sharp pain to them. Even if the light of annihilation caused their bodies to collapse, they wouldn't make such a spine-chilling scream. At once, the woman's entire body began to boil. It was as if some sort of gas had spread out from inside her body. White bubbles began to burst out of her skin. In just a few seconds, she became a mass of white mud. Oh no, What just happened? The human spirit closest to her screamed. Hey, what's the matter? Another one asked confusedly. What on earth is going on? The human spirits turned pale with fright. They hadn't seen anything like this before. They couldn't understand how or why she died in such a brutal manner. Moments after, they heard a crackling sound. Everyone suddenly heard something explode from behind them. As they turned around to look, they saw a bright golden light. It burst out from the coordinates floating in the center of the altar. The coordinates were burning and rapidly collapsing. Someone instantly figured out what made the sound and yelled, "These are her coordinates." Everyone's face darkened. The coordinates collapse only meant one thing. She was now completely dead. Such a weak and pathetic creature doesn't deserve to get an answer. At that moment, the humanoid creature's voice echoed through the entire sky again. It's none of your business that I want to kill all of you. He merely regarded the four spirits sect as nothing but tiny and helpless ants. He looked down upon those insignificant and inferior creatures. Zen's face darkened. He was trying so hard to contain his anger. He asked again, "Are you the downgrader?" After the ancestry-level bloodline recovered, the first thing it wanted to do was find the downgrader. Therefore, Zen sought for the humanoid creature's confirmation for its sake. "Yes, I am," the humanoid creature replied arrogantly. "So this means you lied to the Snake Spirit King. The so-called upgrade and recovery of the main world are all just a bunch of lies, aren't they?" Zen asked once more. He needed the creature to say it himself. "Ha ha ha, isn't it obvious already?" "Of course," the humanoid creature replied nonchalantly. The Snake Masters were utterly bewildered when they heard this. The Snake Spirit King vowed to bring them back to the main world and return them to their previous forms. After all, the fourth grade world was the Snake Masters' true home. This was where they felt the most comfortable. The third grade chaos was too crowded and monotonous for them. It was like losing their sight and being forced to live in a dark world. A while ago, the Snake Masters were absolutely confounded. But now, they finally understood that the Snake Spirit King had led them into a path of no return. Hiss, hiss, black light. Out of the blue, they heard someone shout, "You dare lie to me? I'll make you pay for this." It was the Snake Spirit King who was hiding in the black coordinates. In his anger, he suddenly stretched out his head and waved the two black blades to chop the humanoid creature. The Snake Spirit King already had his suspicions after he killed the Grand Supreme Elderly Lord. But back then, he had no other choice. The only thing he could do was follow the black light and pray that this was not the truth. Therefore, the Snake Spirit King was boiling with rage when he heard the truth from the black light itself. He wanted to tear the humanoid creature into pieces. But before the Snake Spirit King's blades could even come close to the humanoid creature, they instantly shattered into pieces. The Snake Spirit King's black body disintegrated and returned to the coordinates. "In the stellar world, I wiped out the entire fostering race and the cinnabar race. Both of those races were 100 times stronger than you," bragged the humanoid creature. He continued, "In the world of no limits, I had once deceived the sacred spirit race. And that race was 10,000 times stronger than you. And in the boundless divine world, those creatures that disobeyed me were exiled into time and forced to rot. They only needed a millionth of their strength to tear you to shreds," he boasted. "In the boundless world, I was an existence that was way beyond what your imaginations can comprehend." Everyone fell completely silent as they listened to the creature's horrifying declaration. Soon after, the humanoid creature's 6 pairs of eyes emitted a faint light. Everyone could feel the creature's contempt and mockery for them. He was the best of the best. He didn't even bother to look down upon all living beings. To him, they were utterly infinitesimal in the grand scheme of things. "Having heard all that, what do you think the Four Spirits sect means to me?" the humanoid creature asked them all. Chapter 3802, The Mental Cage. The bird masters, the monkey masters, and the human spirits all stared at the humanoid figure in astonishment. His words, combined with the oppressive aura emanating from him, shocked them greatly. What were the so-called cinnabar race and the fostering race? Were they truly 100 times stronger than the Four Spirits sect? And what was the sacred spirit race? Could they really be 10,000 times stronger than the Four Spirits sect? There were existences even more powerful than the sacred spirit race. What worlds was this humanoid creature talking about? All these questions buzzed in their minds as they tried to wrap their heads around everything the humanoid creature talked about. Among everyone present, Corbett seemed to be the calmest. Eyeing the humanoid creature warily, he asked, "The stellar world. Are you talking about the deep space?" The Four Spirits sect had referred to the world above the main world as the deep space. However, Kincaid once mentioned that the deep space had a specific name, the stellar world, he called it. Only very few people knew of this name. What do you think? The humanoid creature retorted indifferently. The world of no limits. And the boundless divine world. Their grades are higher than the deep spaces. Corbett queried further. I have already downgraded those worlds, the humanoid creature declared proudly. Zen stared at the humanoid creature incredulously. Why did you do that? What does the downgrading mean to you? The humanoid creature laughed sinisterly. You don't need to know that. The only thing you need to do is give me the sword. Once I downgrade this world to the 3rd grade, I'll let you live. Maybe I'll even let the human race rule the lower extreme world. This lower extreme world he referred to was actually the chaos. Zen's eyes lit up with interest at the humanoid creature's offer. What do you think? The humanoid creature asked, noticing Zen's sparked interest. It actually sounded like a good idea. After all, Zen's original goal was to revive the human race. To his surprise, Zen smiled. After we rule the lower extreme world, you continue to downgrade it to the 2nd grade, Zen said slowly. Then, I'd become your puppet, like the Snake Spirit King, right? If you refuse, I'll just kill you, along with your race, the humanoid creature said with a nonchalant shrug. The bird masters, the human spirits, the primeval lord of heaven, the snake goddess, and the others who were listening to their exchange all felt their chests tighten. Even the usually valiant monkey masters had fallen silent, caution written all over their faces. The situation was definitely grim. This humanoid creature was so powerful that it was simply impossible to put up a fight. It seemed that Zen's only choice was to accept his offer. However, to everyone's surprise, Zen just smiled calmly. What makes you think you're strong enough to kill me? His words shocked everyone numb. Although he was extremely powerful now and had killed the Snake Spirit King twice, it would be no easy feat to kill this black humanoid figure. What made Zen so confident? If you were really that powerful, why did you leave this sword in the altar for so long? Why did you have to use the Snake Spirit King as a puppet? By now, Zen's calm smile had turned into a smirk. I doubt you are strong enough to downgrade this world. The truth of the matter is that the stellar world wasn't completely downgraded. Now, the remains of the starry sky are still floating above the main world. You were also unable to downgrade the main world, even though you wanted to. Therefore, you needed to have the 4 spirits sect send the world builders to downgrade the worlds little by little. That was why secondary worlds were built one after another, including the chaos. The lower extreme world is not your ultimate goal. If I give you the sword, you will continue to downgrade it. What do you take me for? I'm not that stupid. As Zen spoke, he gradually raised his sword, and the energy in the cracks on the blade slowly began to surge. His face bore an unprecedented firmness. Although the ancestry-level bloodline had forgotten a lot of important memories, Zen had gradually figured out that this humanoid creature in front of him was the root cause of all the trouble. Theoretically, if the worlds hadn't been downgraded so many times, there wouldn't be the 4 spirits sect, the chaos, the human race, or Zen, for that matter. However, this didn't mean that the humanoid creature was right. You, the humanoid creature's voice finally revealed a trace of anger, and his eyes flashed ominously. You're courting death. His black body began to tremble slightly, and black material splattered out like ebony ink on white paper. A terrifying energy emanated from his body, and with a low growl, he waved a black hand fiercely towards Zen's head. While the black hand didn't actually hit Zen, he suddenly cried out in pain. He plummeted rapidly towards the ground, like a falling meteor. Boom! As soon as Zen hit the ground, the humanoid creature stretched out his palm towards the ground. Splash! A black cloud that only he and Zen could see suddenly enveloped Zen. This was the free space that belonged to the probability extreme form. The probability extreme form and the flame extreme form given to Zen had not yet been removed. As he was enshrouded in the black cloud, he quickly divided himself into 1,000 figures. The figures all jumped up at the same time, each brandishing their irregular heavy sword. Green flames erupted from the tips of the blades, whirling like tornadoes of fire. Clatter, clatter, clatter. The spiraling flames looked like a huge monster, constantly devouring the black cloud that tried to envelop Zen. In a flash, the black cloud had been completely devoured. Then, Zen brandished his irregular heavy sword and thrust it at the humanoid creature. Crack! With a sickening sound, the irregular heavy sword pierced clean through the humanoid creature's body, and the green flames quickly swept over his body, lapping at him crazily. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The humanoid creature struggled amidst the flames that were devouring him, but no matter how hard he tried, he was unable to extinguish the flames on his body. A few moments later, he was completely burnt by the flames. Is he dead? Zen's eyebrows shot up cautiously. Although he firmly believed that the humanoid creature wasn't as powerful as he claimed to be, he shouldn't have been so weak. Zen felt a little uneasy, suspecting something was wrong. Zen's heart pumped agitatedly. Just as Zen was carefully studying his surroundings, he felt a sense of oppression coming from behind him. Without any hesitation, he swung his irregular heavy sword towards his back and once again struck the humanoid creature. Whoosh, whoosh, under the burning of the green flames, the humanoid creature was burnt to ashes again. Is this an avatar? Where is his real body? Zen frowned deeply. After killing the second avatar, he was even more agitated, his heart filled with unease. While his mind raced, more and more avatars appeared in front of him, till he was surrounded. While these avatars were not strong enough to withstand the flames, as they multiplied, Zen realized this fight would never end. 1 avatar, 2 avatars, 10 avatars, 100 avatars. Zen slashed at these avatars one after another. Every time he killed an avatar, he became more irritated. He grew more and more paranoid with each avatar he struck, as though he couldn't stop until he killed all these avatars. In this crazed state, he didn't even notice that the surrounding environment was getting more and more hazy. Chapter 3803, Remind Zen. Zen thought that he was fighting avatars of the humanoid creature, but he was wrong. The snake goddess and the others on the altar watched as Zen slashed at black palm-sized bugs, one after another, with his heavy sword. Each time Zen took out a black bug, it'd explode into a faint light, which would then enter his body. As more and more light flew into Zen's body, his expression became wilder and wilder. Little did Zen know that the real humanoid being was calmly floating nearby. As the humanoid creature clapped his hands and opened them, black bugs emerged from his palms and flew towards Zen. It was the dream-breaking bug. The bugs were created for the humanoid creature to perform the soul extreme form. Fully aware of what Zen was capable of with his sword, the humanoid creature had no intention of fighting him head-on. When he summoned the black cloud for the probability extreme form, his plan to crush Zen by driving him crazy had commenced. When Zen destroyed the black cloud, he had fallen right into the humanoid creature's trap. Zen was not native to the stellar world, so he didn't know much about the Thurgies there. Additionally, the spirit inside his heavy sword was not very intelligent. They both fell into the soul extreme form easily. Therefore, it was a breeze for the humanoid being to lure Zen and his sword into his trap. Kill as many as you want. The dream-breaking bugs will poison you and turn you into a mindless killer. That way, you will be insane for the rest of your life. The humanoid creature quietly murmured to himself. When the people on the altar saw this, they also fell into a state of panic. It looks like that he has fallen into an illusion, the snake goddess said, her voice filled with worry. What is that light he keeps absorbing? This is not good. Discussion broke out among the crowd on the altar. From the looks of it, the illusion was difficult to break. Although they were keenly aware that Zen was trapped in an illusion, there was nothing they could do to help. Even the monkey masters and the bird masters couldn't risk coming to Zen's aid, how much more those at the eternal realm. They knew that the humanoid being was too powerful for them to deal with. Even without using the light of annihilation, he could finish off treacherous beings. He could even destroy their coordinates, preventing them from coming back from the dead. We need to make Zen snap out of it. A human spirit cried out. Who can do that? Another human spirit asked. Although they were treacherous beings, they trembled at the thought of eternal death. While everyone hesitated in fear, Lawler suddenly spoke up. I will remind him. Are you sure, Lawler? Duran asked in a low voice. He didn't want to see his comrade get himself killed for nothing. My eyes can see past all illusions, Lawler answered. I am gonna give it a shot. If you fail to break it, you will die, Duran warned him. If we sit here and wait, it'll only be a matter of time before we get killed, Lawler snapped impatiently. Since the humanoid creature's goal is to downgrade the world, he would definitely kill all the treacherous beings. That means all the creatures from the 4th grade world will be slaughtered. Lawler's right, we can't just stand by and do nothing. We can't give up, even if there is just a sliver of hope. As these thoughts raced through Duran's mind, he fell silent. So did the others. They all understood what was at stake here. Thus, no one dissuaded him from going to Zen's aid. Without further hesitation, Lawler flew towards Zen. As soon as Lawler took action, Hamilton of the Black House followed suit. Suddenly, he threw a pair of huge scissors and leapt into the air. They were the dream-breaking scissors, made by the Bold Conjecture House. This magic treasure could break any illusion. The moment Lawler launched himself into the air, Two beams of colorful light shot out from his eyes. The light streaked through the sky and shot towards Zen. In addition, under Hamilton's control, the scissors opened their blades in Zen's direction. Crack! All this didn't escape the humanoid being. Contempt was written all over his face when he saw what was happening. The creatures in the 5th grade world were used to showing their emotions, the humanoid creature wasn't spared from this. He knew there was no need to stop them. The soul extreme form was much more complicated than ordinary illusions. Generally, illusions often covered a designated area, creating a dreamlike scene. However, the soul extreme form worked on a specific object, as opposed to an area. Since Zen was haunted by the soul extreme form, the humanoid creature was confident there was nothing that Lawler and Hamilton could do to save Zen. Now that you have no chance of winning whatsoever, you should know your place and stay out of this, the humanoid creature sneered haughtily. As he watched Lawler and Hamilton, his 6 pairs of eyes began to flash intensely. Lawler and Hamilton abruptly stopped in their tracks, as though frozen in place. Then, bubbles appeared on their bodies, until they melted into a puddle of white, translucent mud. Unfortunately, their coordinates weren't spared, and vanished into thin air. A dead silence fell over the altar again. Facing the humanoid being, they felt as weak as ants. Not only were they unable to fight against such a powerful existence, but they couldn't even figure out what method he was using against them. Alas, someone sighed and sat on the ground, his head drooping dejectedly. He had given up. Some clenched their fists, glaring at the sky helplessly. Some were angry, but they didn't dare make a sound. The snake goddess tilted her head as she watched Zen continue slaying the black bugs one by one. Her eyebrows furrowed deeply as she tried to come up with a solution. Suddenly, her eyes lit up decisively. "I will go myself," she said to the primeval Lord of Heaven. "What?" the primeval Lord of Heaven asked confusedly, caught in a daze. "I am gonna head for the primitive land," the snake goddess said firmly. Since Zen is trapped in this illusion, his heavy sword and the Grand Supreme Elderly Lord who was in Zen's mind are also stuck there, she thought silently. Despite that, we can communicate with Zen in the primitive land. The primeval Lord of Heaven perked up. "Are you sure?" The snake goddess nodded. Without wasting any time, the primeval Lord of Heaven took out the descending ring and made it float above the snake goddess's head. The descending ring then emitted a golden light that enveloped the snake goddess. In the blink of an eye, the snake goddess was transported to the primitive land. Although the humanoid creature noticed this, he didn't pay it any heed. Again, he was confident this weakling wouldn't be able to do a thing to ruin his plans. When the snake goddess arrived at the Pear Hill, she headed straight for the civilization artifact of the human race. She was in such a rush, she didn't even bother greeting the people there. When she finally reached it, the snake goddess stretched out her hand and pressed it against the civilization artifact. Activating the artifact, she tried to speak to Zen. Since she was in the primitive land, which was actually Zen's inner world, she hoped that she might be able to reach Zen and free him from the illusion. The civilization artifact began to flash with a green light. "Zen, can you hear me?" the snake goddess asked. She waited for a bit, but she didn't get any response. She tried several more times, but Zen still didn't respond. "So, this isn't working." The snake goddess lowered her head, her shoulders hunched in disappointment. Just then, the Eternal Realm warriors of the current chaotic era like the Snake Goddess, Fuxi, and Eastern Emperor Tai walked up to her. "Snake Goddess, what happened in Jade Pure Realm? Why are you in such a hurry?" the Snake Goddess of the current chaotic era asked. It was actually kind of weird to talk to oneself. But noticing that the real Snake Goddess was so anxious, she speculated that they must have encountered a big problem. Chapter 3804, Free. The real Snake Goddess briefly described Zen's current situation. Naturally, Fuxi and the others were worried when they heard that Zen had fallen into the illusion. "What about the Monkey Spirit King? You had many allies with you when you entered the Jade Pure Realm this time," said the Snake Goddess. They were well prepared for this expedition. They took the necessary precautions and decided it was best to go together. One could say that they gathered all of the powerful warriors in the Monkey Spirit Sect, the Bird Spirit Sect and the Human Spirit Sect. However, the real Snake Goddess smiled bitterly. "They are still not powerful enough. In the end, we just had to rely on Zen to kill the Snake Spirit King. Moreover, there is an even more powerful being behind the Snake Spirit King. He is the real root of all this chaos." When they heard this, the Snake Goddess, Fuxi, and the others fell silent. This unexpected turn of events was way beyond their wildest imaginations. "Let's try reaching him through the civilization artifact of the Heavenly Obsession Civilization," suggested the Snake Goddess. When they reached another civilization artifact, they called out the green figure inside it. The green figure immediately responded. It agreed to their request and tried to communicate with Zen. Unfortunately, it failed again. The Regal Jade Civilization's civilization artifact was the only artifact they hadn't tried using. But because the first two civilization artifacts already failed, there was no need to try it anymore. Zen is our only hope now. If he is defeated, then everything will be over. The snake goddess pursed her lips. She was deeply distressed. Her beautiful face showed extreme anxiety. The others were at a loss for words. They didn't know what else to do. Everyone was feeling downhearted and gloomy. All of a sudden, the snake goddess raised her head. Her eyes were fixed upon the crimson sky above them. Ever since Zen started the battle, energies of various colors flowed and danced in the crimson sky. All of the energies gathered in the center of the primitive land. In turn, these energies were being continuously transmitted to Zen. Even the creatures of the primitive land could sense that, as the energies, aura was extremely powerful. I'm just wondering about something. The ancestry-level bloodline is intelligent. Didn't it notice that something happened to Zen? The snake goddess mused while still staring up at the sky. The real snake goddess thought for a while. Then, she raised her eyebrows and said, maybe it hasn't discovered it yet. We can try communicating with it. Fuxi shrugged his shoulders and said, the ancestry-level bloodline only communicates with Zen. It has never communicated with us. Everyone knew that this crimson sky possessed intelligence. Zen had even mentioned it to them before. However, no one ever tried to communicate with it. How will we know what could happen if we don't even try? Let's just do it. As soon as the real snake goddess finished speaking, she used the grand teleportation technique and headed straight to the top of the primitive land. The others followed her closely. Naturally, they felt a strong sense of pressure when the snake goddess and the others stood directly below the blood-red sky. Then, before they could go any further, a thunderous and commanding voice came from the crimson sky. All of you, retreat. Now that the ancestry-level bloodline was busy transferring the energy to Zen, it had no time to deal with the creatures in the primitive land. Nevertheless, everyone was overjoyed when the ancestry-level bloodline spoke. A few moments ago, they were afraid that it wouldn't respond. The real snake goddess went straight to the point and said, I am the snake goddess, coming down from the altar. Are you aware that Zen has fallen into the illusion? What did you say? There was a trace of bewilderment in the otherwise monotonous voice of the ancestry-level bloodline. When the soul extreme form trapped Zen, it was able to deceive him, the Grand Supreme Elderly Lord, the irregular heavy sword, and even the ancestry-level bloodline. At that very moment, the ancestry-level bloodline had also been feeling extremely anxious. Something was definitely amiss. There was no end to the number of humanoid creatures that kept appearing. As Zen continued to fight them, his state of mind became awfully unstable. The ancestry-level bloodline had already sensed that there was something wrong. Unfortunately, the soul extreme form could silently affect one's ability to think. Therefore, it was unable to find out what exactly was going on. Zen, the Grand Supreme Elderly Lord and the irregular heavy sword also sensed that something wasn't right. But as the warning came from the real snake goddess, the ancestry-level bloodline finally figured out what was going on. They had been bewitched by the humanoid being. There were cracking sounds that echoed from within the crimson sky. Zen couldn't quite remember how many humanoid creatures he had already killed. Based on his understanding, the creation of the avatars would exhaust a lot of the humanoid creature's energy. Therefore, he hacked these avatars down one by one until the humanoid creature could no longer create them. However, the number of humanoid creatures he was facing seemed infinite. He would not be able to kill all of them. Little by little, he became more irritable and angrier. His eyes began to glow red. It was as if he was going to devour people. Zen, the ancestry bloodline tried communicating with Zen. Zen, listen to me. The ancestry-level bloodline's voice was coming from his inner world. Even though Zen heard this voice, it seemed like it was coming from a distant place. He did not have the slightest intention of responding to it. He was too busy cutting down the humanoid creatures. Zen, he couldn't be bothered to listen to this pesky voice. Therefore, Zen didn't respond at all as the ancestry-level bloodline kept calling out his name. The ancestry-level bloodline thought for a while. Soon enough, it came up with a plan to awaken him from this illusion. It injected a violent energy into Zen's body. This violent energy did not flow into the irregular heavy sword. Instead, it flowed along Zen's meridians. And then, it directly exploded within his chest. He heard a loud booming sound and suddenly felt a sharp pain in his chest. It created an open wound on Zen's chest. He merely looked down on his chest and then attacked the humanoid creatures frenziedly. He thought that this attack came from the humanoid creatures. Naturally, he counterattacked even more wildly. It's useless. I should try something else. The ancestry-level bloodline paused for a moment to think of another plan. This time, it launched a soul attack on Zen. As the blood-red sky flashed, a brown aura gathered in the center of the primitive land. It instantly entered Zen's body and turned into a sharp needle. It headed straight for Zen's mind. Just as the needle was drilling into Zen's mind, a streak of white flashing light burst out of his mind and extinguished the needle in an instant. What just happened? What is that? At first, the ancestry-level bloodline was stunned. Nonetheless, it immediately understood what was going on. The difference between the energies of the 5th grade world and the 4th grade world in terms of strength was not that huge. After all, the energies from the 5th grade world only changed from 140 kinds to 373 kinds in the 4th grade world. But they would develop into 3,000 kinds in the 3rd grade world. The gap between them would be very huge. Zen's current situation was very similar to being caught in the mind-trapping technique. However, the humanoid creature's theurgy was obviously stronger than the mind-trapping technique of the ancestry-level bloodline. I see. So it can only be consumed little by little. As soon as it figured this out, the ancestry-level bloodline started to attack Zen's soul incessantly. As expected, these soul attacks were quickly blocked by the white light and were extinguished in a flash. Even though the flashing white light was powerful, it was still limited. Meanwhile, Zen was still stubbornly killing those humanoid creatures. He was continuously absorbing the white light. The speed at which the light was consumed was not as fast as the speed in which he replenished it. As the ancestry-level bloodline's soul attacks became more intense and relentless, the speed at which the white flashing light was consumed became faster. Slowly, the hostility on Zen's face began to fade. His bright red eyes gradually returned to their original color. What is happening? How? The humanoid creature was not that far from where Zen was standing. A look of surprise flashed in his compound eyes. How are you able to break free from the soul extreme form? It is quite impossible. Ah, I see. Someone is helping you. The humanoid creature was shocked. However, he didn't pay much attention to it. His goal was not Zen to begin with. It was the irregular heavy sword he was after. As long as this sword was detached from Zen, he had nothing to fear. Gradually, the white light in Zen's mind faded away. Finally, he came to his senses. Only then did he realize that the ones he killed were not the humanoid creatures but merely black bugs. Chapter 3805, The Heavy Sword Losing Its Mind. Zen had already managed to come back to his senses, but the heavy sword he was wielding in his hand was still trapped in the illusion of the humanoid creature. It was not easy for the spirit inside the sword to regain its senses. Thus, under its control, Zen just continued to slay the black bugs rushing towards him. At the same time, once a black bug was killed, a white light would appear from it. Some of the white lights would enter Zen's body, while the rest penetrated the heavy sword. What is this? What's going on? Zen couldn't prevent the white lights from invading his body. As the lights reached his mind, he felt a sensation that his thoughts were being manipulated. Fortunately, the ancestry-level bloodline was on high alert. As soon as the white lights entered Zen's mind, it would immediately take action and purge them. Can you also destroy these white lights inside the sword? Zen asked the ancestry-level bloodline. If the white lights continued to infest the heavy sword, he would also be greatly affected. I can give it a try, the ancestry-level bloodline replied briefly. Without Zen telling it, it could sense that he was being controlled by the sword in his hand. Thus, the ancestry-level bloodline quickly released a brown aura, making it flow through Zen's body and spread along his arms in order to permeate the heavy sword. The instant that the brown aura penetrated the sword, beams of white lights swarmed towards it. The white lights were like an automatic defense mechanism that attacked any foreign entity that probed into their territory. In their clash, the ancestry-level bloodline didn't care about spending as much energy as it could because it was basically powered by infinite energy. It was pretty confident that it could prevail and remove all the white lights inside the sword, though it might take a little while. However, the sword responded immediately as the ancestry-level bloodline launched a soul attack. Currently, the spirit of the sword got carried away in slaying the black bugs. But when it noticed the soul attack coming from the ancestry-level bloodline, it immediately shifted its focus and fought without hesitation. Then, wisps of green energy came out of the sword's spirit which looked like a ball of red light. As the green energy was released, the sword was able to successfully resist the soul attack of the ancestry-level bloodline. This is troublesome. The ancestry-level bloodline was rendered speechless by the turn of events. It definitely intended to save the sword's spirit, but the latter saw the ancestry-level bloodline as an enemy and fought back. The white lights continued to confuse and control the spirit of the sword, but it had no way to realize it. So, how did it go? Zen inquired as he gripped tightly on the heavy sword. I failed. This approach doesn't seem to work. The spirit of the sword noticed my soul attack and immediately fought back. The white lights inside are manipulating it into thinking that I am an enemy, the ancestry-level bloodline replied in a frustrated tone. Zen was a bit surprised at the ancestry-level bloodline's response. He tried to calm down and thought of a feasible solution before he said, we can keep it from acquiring the energy it needs. Originally, the heavy sword was only left with a little energy. That was why the sword was not very powerful when it was still in Kincaid's possession. Then, all of the energy that accumulated on the altar for so many years was consumed by Zen. The sword was constantly attacking with its full might and even activated the probability extreme form and the flame extreme form earlier. But once the ancestry-level bloodline stopped providing it with energy coming from Zen, the spirit of the sword would eventually run out of energy soon enough. When that happened, the ancestry-level bloodline could take the opportunity and remove the white lights inside the sword. Excellent idea, I'm on it. The ancestry-level bloodline quickly grasped what Zen was planning, so it didn't waste any time and initiated their move. At this moment, the blood-colored sky in the primitive land instantly calmed down. When the snake goddess, Fuxi, and the others noticed the silence in the sky, they all thought that the fight between Zen and the humanoid being was finally over. Under the control of the sword spirit, Zen had been constantly using and brandishing the heavy sword to kill the bugs. However, the ancestry-level bloodline had already stopped providing it with additional energy, thus the energy stored inside the sword eventually ran out. In turn, the lights that it emitted also grew dimmer. Although the spirit of the sword was still eager and frantic to slaughter the black bugs, it was unable to do so because it was already lacking with energy. What's going on? The humanoid creature immediately sensed that something wrong was going on with the sword in Zen's hand. However, as his 6 pairs of compound eyes flashed, he instantly figured out what Zen had been up to. Ha ha, you insolent brat, do you think you can outsmart me with your petty tricks? As soon as he finished speaking, the humanoid creature stretched out his hand and a black cloud instantly emerged above Zen's head. Since Zen couldn't use the heavy sword that had run out of energy, the humanoid creature tried to take the upper hand and bring Zen down using the probability extreme form. At Zen's current state, he wouldn't be able to utilize the probability extreme form to counter the attack of the humanoid creature. He's going to use the probability extreme form again, he said as his eyes widened in shock and anger upon sensing the hint of energy coming out from the humanoid being. The moment Zen finished speaking, he suddenly felt that a massive fist smashed against his chest. He was caught off guard and didn't even have the time to react. Although his body was astonishingly tough, the punch was still able to make a hole in his chest. In the probability extreme form, the humanoid creature was able to throw tens of thousands of punches within 2 seconds. The heavy sword was rendered useless and had no way to protect Zen. Crash, bang, the humanoid creature's fists continuously landed on Zen's body at lightning speed. Almost every part of Zen's body was hit by his dreadful punches. Fist marks were soon imprinted on Zen's body after it was beaten at the same spots countless times. Then, the people on the altar saw that Zen's body was floating in the sky. An invisible creature seemed to be cruelly pounding him as if he was a mere sandbag. What the hell's happening? Is that really Zen? Why isn't he fighting back? Several people got confused and worried at the sight of him being beaten continuously. However, they couldn't do anything but entrust this to Zen. After all, it was a battle that they didn't even understand, not to mention get involved with it. Even the powerful monkey masters and bird masters couldn't do anything except watch and wait for the outcome of this battle. As Zen was being thoroughly beaten down, the ancestry-level bloodline was left with no choice. It couldn't let Zen be defeated like this, so it provided the heavy sword with energy again. In the blink of an eye, the sword emitted bright lights again, thus allowing Zen to activate the probability extreme form and flame extreme form. Zen swiftly moved along the thick black cloud and repeatedly slashed it using the sword, producing green clouds of fire. These flaming clouds instantly burned the black cloud and turned it into nothing. However, the humanoid creature still had no intention of fighting Zen head-on. Just before the black cloud was vanquished, he quickly retreated and hid a place where the dark cloud didn't cover. He then stretched out his hand, and fist-sized bugs came rushing out from the back hole on his palm. Upon sensing the black bugs, the sword immediately manipulated Zen again to kill them. The sword started wreaking havoc once more as if it had gone insane. It's so annoying. This guy doesn't give me a chance to take a break at all. Zen shouted as he narrowed his eyes towards the humanoid creature. The humanoid being perceived Zen's vexation and laughed grimly. You can't fool me with your little tricks. Swear your loyalty to me before I completely pollute that sword's spirit. What do you think? He offered. He obviously wanted to deal with the sword using his soul extreme form. Once he succeeded, he would be able to keep the spirit of the sword under his absolute control. You think I would agree to that nonsense? No way, Zen yelled coldly. Well, you wasted your last chance, stupid human, the humanoid creature said in a disgruntled tone. As he stretched out his hand, more and more black bugs appeared and flew towards Zen. All of them were slaughtered by the sword, mistaking them for the humanoid beings as it was still greatly affected by the soul extreme form. Consequently, more and more white lights invaded the sword, making the sword's spirit break and lose its mind. As the humanoid creature witnessed this, his eyes flashed with thrill. It's almost done, Soul Storm, he declared in a booming voice. As the humanoid creature issued the order, a massive number of white lights immediately gathered and entered the sword. Chapter 3806, Snatching the Sword. The soul storm that the humanoid creature mentioned had blown up. The light emitted by the irregular heavy sword began to spread in a chaotic manner. Previously, although the sword was bewitched by the soul extreme form, at least a part of it was still sober. It still attacked the humanoid creatures transformed by the black bugs in an orderly fashion. At this moment, however, the sword seemed to have become completely lost. The ancestry-level bloodline was still continuously providing it with energy, but it was transforming the injected energy into various forms and releasing it in random spurts. Faint golden light shone from the cracks on the surface of the sword. Suddenly, a glowing circular ring appeared. The irregular heavy sword spewed out a bright golden beam. The light shot out and cut through the air. It obviously wasn't targeting anything. It hit a random patch of ground. There was a crack as the light sliced down. It pierced through the ground of the Jade Pure Realm. The golden light penetrated to the stage below and kept going. It passed through the Grand Plane stage, the Sanskrit Light stage, the Blooming Jade stage, the Constant Glory stage. In a few seconds, almost every other shore creature on every stage saw this golden light column as it passed through. Some unfortunate other shore creatures happened to be in the way of the light, and whatever the light touched melted without a trace. Everything in the path of the golden light column was obliterated. But the irregular heavy sword was still emitting more energy. The circles of golden light appeared one after another around the sword. Golden light columns shot outwards in all directions, and there seemed to be nothing on the other shore that could stop them. Several light columns hit the altar, and a few monkey masters and bird masters who failed to dodge the beams dissipated upon being touched by the golden light. The holy light extreme form, said the humanoid creature, laughing. He enjoyed seeing the sword in a state of madness. Finally, the irregular heavy sword seemed to have released all the golden light. The surface of the sword began to darken, with traces of green forming on the sharp blade. A green mist rose from the sword. The green mist spread out. It contained many small dark green arrows. Although these small arrows had a powerful life energy, they were fatal. Every life form hit by the arrows would rapidly wither and die. Luckily, these dark green arrows were not as swift as the golden beams of light. Because the arrows moved at a slower speed, the people on the altar all managed to dodge the new attack. The humanoid creature didn't dodge. He stood calmly in place and reached out to pluck a small arrow in midair. He held it up, examining it closely. This is the life extreme form, the arrow of death. Then the green mist began to dissipate as flashes of lightning shot out from the sword. It was followed by dark orbs that floated like black moons in the surrounding air. What the hell does it want to do? Zen was still tightly holding onto the irregular heavy sword. It must have gone crazy, said the ancestry-level bloodline. Then cut off the energy supply. Zen shouted. Although the irregular heavy sword didn't hurt Zen as it attacked, many others were hurt. Several people on the altar were killed. More were dying at present, unable to resist the latest lightning attack released by the sword. If I cut off the energy supply, how will you deal with that guy? Asked the ancestry-level bloodline. The humanoid creature was waiting, looking unafraid. Indeed, he even seemed entertained. Once the irregular heavy sword stopped attacking, he would definitely attack Zen without hesitation. However, Zen could not let the irregular heavy sword just keep spewing out mad attacks at random. That was not an acceptable solution. Zen gripped the sword tightly, beginning to feel anxious. He came up with one idea after another, but found major flaws in each one. He dismissed every plan that came to mind until it seemed he was out of ideas. A loud crack reverberated in the air. An invisible force field had suddenly appeared on the surface of the irregular heavy sword. It was the force field extreme form. When the invisible force field surged out, it pushed away Zen's hand, and the sword finally slipped out of his grasp. "It's time," cried the humanoid creature. His compound eyes flashed and he went straight for the irregular heavy sword. Once it had lost its energy supply, the irregular heavy sword was no more than a piece of scrap iron, so it was easily controlled. Zen's expression darkened as he quickly reached out, trying to grab back the hilt of the sword. Just as his hand brushed across the sword hilt, Zen suddenly felt a unique aura. Black cloud, the probability extreme form. Zen thought. The idea crossed his mind unexpectedly, and an ominous premonition rose in his mind. "Damn it," he shouted. In the blink of an eye, the ominous premonition became reality. There was a series of loud bangs, as the humanoid creature launched a violent attack on Zen in the probability extreme form. With a boom, Zen was smashed into the ground. A billowing cloud of dust rose up over his sprawled form. The humanoid creature grabbed the irregular heavy sword. The people on the altar watched with their mouths open, shocked at the sudden turn of events. Even the least intelligent warriors understood what was happening. "It's all over. It's all over," Gong Gong muttered. He had turned into a figure of water, becoming liquid and transparent all throughout his body in order to avoid being hurt by the irregular heavy sword. Fuxi, Alphonse, and Corbett were silent. The monkey masters and the bird masters looked stunned. Their only hope had been shattered. In that instant, they were overcome by a terrible emptiness and distress. Zen lay in the rubble where he had fallen. His face was full of anger, and he struggled to rise, unwilling to accept this outcome. He had thought that he could grasp an infinite amount of power, but he was wrong. His opponent now had taken away such power easily. It was enough to plunge anyone into despair. The humanoid creature howled. He appeared to be bursting with excitement. He held the irregular heavy sword with both hands. 6 pairs of compound eyes looked up at the sky as his mouth opened, forming unfamiliar sounds. Although no one knew what he was saying, the emotions behind his words were obvious. It was the exhilaration of one who had survived many vicissitudes of life, and managed at last to obtain something he had been pursuing for a long time. His excitement formed a sharp contrast with the desperation of the crowd. It made everyone else even more depressed. "This day has come too late, but at last I've taken it back. Clarence, it's a pity you can't see this," said the humanoid creature with a sharp bark of laughter. "Taken it back? Did that sword originally belong to him?" The snake goddess asked quietly, her head tilted as she watched the celebration of the humanoid creature. Just now, she had hurriedly returned to the other shore after informing the ancestry-level bloodline that Zen had lost his mind and fallen into an illusion. "Who was the Clarence he mentioned?" the primeval Lord of Heaven asked curiously. Fuxi spread out his hands. "Does it even matter now?" The snake goddess and the primeval Lord of Heaven didn't say anything. Of course, they understood they were in dire straits. The humanoid creature raised the irregular heavy sword, looking around at everyone watching him. "I have not felt this excited in a long time. I'll kill you and offer your lives to the sword." A buzz filled the air, as the blade of the irregular heavy sword flashed with a dark purple energy. After several moments, purple cracks began spreading around the humanoid creature, and black energy balls emerged one after another from the cracks. These energy balls contained a violent and terrifying power. "Go to hell," shouted the humanoid creature. Hundreds of purple-black energy balls rained down from the sky, as though the god of death had come. Some people started to run, trying to escape. Others stayed where they were. Some even changed their forms, trying to defend themselves against this new attack. The snake goddess stood still. These purple cracks were spreading very quickly. Before long, the entire Jade Pure realm would be covered with purple-black energy balls. When the purple-black energy balls covered the whole area, they would die no matter where they had run. "Ah, Zen, it seems that you can't escape this," she sighed. She looked towards Zen, who was lying on the ground in the distance. This was the first time that Zen had failed to meet the snake goddess's expectations. It was not his fault. The existence he faced had already far exceeded the limits of his abilities and resistance. It was a miracle that he had held on for so long. Zen had always managed to pull miracles out of thin air, but he couldn't create miracles forever. Chapter 3807, Reunion. The purple energy balls were falling down slowly from above. It was as if a stage on the other shore was sluggishly crumbling after it collapsed. As the primeval Lord of Heaven saw this, he quickly stretched out his hand and flicked 2 golden rings towards Fuxi and Gong Gong. The rings that emitted golden lights darted and stopped above their heads. "You 3, leave now while there's still time," the primeval Lord of Heaven said in a soft voice. The snake goddess had a descending ring with her, so she could descend to the primitive land any time. Then, what about you? The snake goddess asked as she raised her eyebrows. It makes no difference whether I leave or not, the primeval Lord of Heaven replied with a bitter smile on his face. He clearly knew that everything and everyone was going to be destroyed eventually. There was no point in prolonging the suffering and needless struggles. However, deep inside him, all of his frustrations were built up. He couldn't accept that everything was just going to end this way. Everyone knew how difficult it was for him to reach this certain step. However, he had failed in the last one, and now, he felt very much dead inside. Among them, Gong Gong was the first one who activated the descending ring. After the ring emitted luminous lights, his body trembled, but his body still stayed right where he was. What's going on? I can't leave. Gong Gong's voice trembled as he realized this. Among the human heroes, he had always been the most careful and cautious one. He was relatively afraid of death. Fuxi was kind of surprised when he saw what happened to Gong Gong, so he also activated the descending ring given to him. However, just as what happened to Gong Gong, he also failed to leave. Then, the snake goddess gave it a try, but the result was just the same. A bitter and helpless smile appeared on her face as she looked at Zen in the distance. If we can't leave the other shore, then I'm afraid that it's also the same for Zen. At the same moment, Zen was also quietly looking at the sky. His expression was as calm as ever. He had just tried to recite the illusion-breaking rune to leave the Jade Pure Realm, but it didn't have any effect. It was as if he had been showered with the soul-interdicting water, making it impossible to leave the other shore. Will the primitive land also collapse if I die? Zen asked the ancestry-level bloodline with a hint of hesitation. Yes, the ancestry-level bloodline replied briefly. Although the current primitive land was built with the aid of the ancestry-level bloodline, Zen was still its owner, making him indispensable to it. What about you? What will happen to you after? Zen asked again. Me, I will have no choice but to leave the primitive land, the ancestry-level bloodline answered. I see. Can you please take care of my family for me? Zen asked with a slightly trembling voice. Sure, I will. Actually, the result would still be the same whether the ancestry-level bloodline took care of them or not. Even Zen knew this. The downgrade had already begun. It meant that the entire chaos would soon be under the control of the humanoid creature. At the same time, Zen remembered his loved ones, Dorothy, Letitia, Margaret, Lavender. Their beautiful faces appeared in front of Zen as if he was hallucinating. At this moment, he suddenly felt a deep sense of regret. From the moment he knew them, his life turned out like a chess piece that was being constantly pushed, running around all the time. From the eastern region to the universe, from the divine land to the source world, he was restlessly going here and there. He rarely paused and took the time to be with the most important people in his life. If he had only known that this would be the ending, he thought that he would have rather chosen to be a mere mortal and spend the rest of his life with them in peace. It didn't matter what mission he had to accomplish, nor would he care about the end of the chaos or the downgrade. Then, suddenly, he remembered Jeffrey. He and Zia were still in the main world at this time. If the humanoid creature completes the downgrade, what will happen to Jeffrey and Zia who stay in the main world? Zen asked out of nowhere. They will also die, the ancestry-level bloodline answered with all honesty. Zen couldn't help but fall silent upon hearing this. Right now, the purple energy balls that were falling were already getting closer and closer to them. 10,000 feet, 8,000 feet, 500 feet. Boom! The altar in the distance was the first one to be eroded by the purple energy balls. Before Fuxi got erased by the purple energy balls, he waved at Zen. Goodbye, Zen. The snake goddess just knelt on the ground and closed her captivating eyes. The primeval Lord of Heaven just stood still as he awaited his impending doom. On the other hand, Gong Gong continued to struggle. He turned into a pool of water and flowed down from the altar, seeping into the ground. Several others were also unwilling to give up and desperately climbed down from the altar, trying to buy themselves a few more minutes or seconds to survive. At the same time, many people just stayed where they were and waited for what was going to happen. Sizzle, sizzle, the purple energy balls had finally reached the snake goddess, Fuxi, and the primeval Lord of Heaven. They all quickly melted and disappeared without a trace within the energy balls. Soon after, the altar where they were standing also collapsed. The overbearing power of the energy balls eroded the altar layer by layer. At this point, these energy balls were only just about 10 feet above Zen's head. But suddenly, a space fluctuation occurred directly behind him. With a surprised look on his face, he quickly turned and saw a door appeared. This door, Zen somehow regained his senses as his eyes widened. Whoosh! The door suddenly sprang open. Then, a pair of huge fluffy hands stretched out from the door and hurriedly grabbed and pulled Zen in. Bang! As soon as Zen was able to enter the door, it closed shut and disappeared in the space. All of this happened in the blink of an eye, but this still didn't go unnoticed in the eyes of the humanoid creature. Really, the humanoid creature expressed a trace of confusion in his eyes. He still had a backup plan for escape at this point. Well, it doesn't matter. No matter how much he struggles, he can only exist for a few more days. To be honest, the humanoid creature didn't actually care if Zen died right away or was still able to escape. In his mind, he clearly knew that no one would get away from the fate of fading away soon. From the very moment that he got total control of the heavy sword, the ending had been decided. There was no possibility of anyone overturning the situation. Meanwhile, inside the door where Zen was pulled into, 2 rows of long-haired monsters could be seen standing on both sides of the passageway. All of them focused their gazes on Zen. Zen had a hunch when he first saw the door, but he was a little unsure. "Who are you? Where am I?" Zen asked with a straight face. However, there was nothing but silence, and no one answered him. Then, Zen heard that footsteps were coming from the end of the passageway. As the footsteps drew nearer and nearer, a figure slowly appeared from the darkness. It was Dorothy, whom he hadn't seen in a long while. Dorothy. Zen wasn't very surprised upon seeing her face because he had an earlier suspicion when the door appeared behind him. But still, he couldn't hide the joy and excitement as he saw her with his eyes. Dorothy clenched her fists tightly to control her emotions. About half a minute passed before she was able to answer Zen's question. "These creatures are from the Bold Conjecture House of the Human Spirit Sect." "The Bold Conjecture House, I see." Zen nodded, immediately understanding the meaning behind her words. He had heard of the name of this house so many times. It could be said that its members were the founders of the entire human spirit sect, and were also known as the smartest group of people within the sect. Even Elder Shui, who helped him obtain the ancestry-level bloodline, came from the Bold Conjecture House. As Zen finished speaking, Dorothy wasn't able to hold her emotions anymore, and suddenly rushed and threw herself in Zen's arms. "I'm so sorry, I came in too late. We might have the chance to avoid all this," she said in a muffled voice as she cried on Zen's chest. Zen immediately understood when Dorothy said that she was late, but for a moment, he was a bit reluctant to realize what chance she was pertaining to. Then he smiled bitterly and said, "It's indeed a little late, but even if you came a bit earlier, I'm afraid that nothing would have changed." "Why, what do you mean?" Dorothy asked with a puzzled expression as she wiped her tears. "Because even if you were able to wake Kincaid up, he wouldn't be able to resist such an existence," Zen said calmly. "No way. Master Kincaid is the strongest warrior in the human spirit sect. If he woke up, you'll see that he would be much stronger than that guy." "That's right. Master Kincaid is our last hope. We must find him at once." Several long-haired monsters retorted and were convinced that Kincaid was the answer to surpass this overwhelming crisis. But Zen just gently smiled and said, "Even if Master Kincaid used that sword, he might not be as powerful as me." "How can you even be sure about that?" One of the long-haired monsters reacted in a cynical tone. "How?" Zen thought for a moment and said, "Because Elder Shui helped me obtain the ancestry-level bloodline. I'm the only one who could unleash the power of that sword to the fullest." What? How is that even possible? You mean that you have the ancestry-level bloodline within your body?" The long-haired monsters were all stunned. That was the only time that they remembered Elder Shui. He left the Bold Conjecture House a long time ago before he headed for the deep space. Chapter 3808. Satisfy his obsession. In the past, both the Bold Conjecture House and Kincaid himself had opposed Elder Shui's idea of venturing into the deep space. As a result, Elder Shui decided to leave abruptly, without so much as a goodbye. He only left a letter for them. After that, they hadn't heard from him. After all this time, they figured he had perished. And yet, now, Zen was claiming he had news from Elder Shui. Hence they felt shock mixed with doubt. "Elder Shui, how is it possible that you saw him?" a long-haired monster inquired, his tone littered with doubt. "Elder Shui went to the deep space alone back then," another long-haired monster mused aloud. "Although we thought he wouldn't survive, he did manage to avoid the catastrophe that happened in the main world. Never mind that, he found the way to fuse with the ancestry-level bloodline." "When and where did you see him?" The long-haired monsters buzzed with questions, their eyes brimming with excitement. Zen shook his head regretfully. "I didn't see him personally, but someone else did. As soon as he finished speaking, the Grand Supreme Elderly Lord's remnant soul emerged from above Zen's head. He then recounted how he had met Elder Shui. He explained how he had hidden in the Jade Pure Realm and how Elder Shui had planned everything. The long-haired monsters all listened closely, their shock steadily growing with each story the Grand Supreme Elderly Lord told. Although they all shared the same roots and were all very smart creatures, they couldn't deny that they were impressed by how far Elder Shui had come. I must admit, Elder Shui is the most far-sighted person amongst the Bold Conjecture House. I didn't expect him to come so far. We should have believed him back then. While the other long-haired monsters discussed excitedly, a white-haired monster slowly took a few steps forward. I was wrong about Elder Shui, he suddenly said, his tone filled with regret. I had even scolded him back then. I didn't know he had so much alone. Then, he smiled, but what's important is, he made it. May I know your name? Zen asked him politely. The white-haired monster cupped his hands courteously and said, I am Hilario Wen, the chief of the Bold Conjecture House. The strongest person in the human spirit sect was Kincaid, the human spirit king. Below him were the 10 Directions House and the Bold Conjecture House. The two houses were responsible for military and civil affairs, respectively. Hence, Hilario was in charge of the latter. Zen also cupped his hands and bowed in return. Hilario studied Zen carefully. The ancestry-level bloodline is believed to be the origin of everything, and it can provide endless power. If that sword was in your possession, you should have been invincible in this world. There was a tinge of doubt in his voice. He still felt it was hard to believe Zen's words. The Bold Conjecture House had made many relevant conjectures. Hilario had deduced that the strongest power in the main world was in theory the combination of the ancestry-level bloodline and that sword. Theoretically, anyone who owned both should be able to take control of everything. My enemy came from the world above the deep space. He is a higher-level opponent, Zen explained, seeing they still doubted him. Hilario was stunned for a moment. Do you mean he is someone from the 6th grade world? The other long-haired monsters who had been discussing amongst themselves suddenly stopped to listen. They too were intrigued by their conversation. These creatures had taken it upon themselves to explore the truth of the world. Thus, while they were almost certain that there was a higher-grade world above the deep space, they had figured that it was too difficult for them to explore even the deep space itself. Even if there was a higher-grade world, it was most likely something beyond their understanding, so it only existed in their assumptions. Zen shook his head. No, in fact, he might be from the 7th, 8th, or even 9th grade world. What? How is that possible? How could there be such an existence? Impossible. You must be joking. Chaos erupted amongst the long-haired monsters. They just couldn't believe Zen's words. Believe it or not, Zen said indifferently. The world you lived in was downgraded from the higher-grade worlds by him. That's why he's called the downgrader. Why would he do such a thing? Hilario queried, his curiosity piqued. Who knows? Zen shrugged. Maybe this was his way of dealing with someone. Or perhaps he was trying to escape from someone. The only information Zen garnered from the humanoid creature was that he had faced an opponent named Clarence. It's no wonder, then. Hilario shook his head and sighed. No wonder you lost. He finally understood how Zen had been defeated. Now that Zen, who possessed the ancestry-level bloodline, had been defeated, it would be useless even if they did awaken Kincaid. Although Kincaid was powerful, he would never do better than Zen. They had heavily underestimated their enemy. Well, then, can't I see my father? Can't your curses be removed now? Dorothy asked, tears still brimming in her bright eyes. Your father must be the human spirit king, Kincaid, right? Zen gently stroked her hair, smiling at her fondly. When he had seen the woman who looked exactly like Dorothy in the altar, Zen guessed the truth of the matter. Yes, she nodded. At first, Dorothy didn't know much about it, but gradually, it dawned on her. Zen stretched out his hand. With a flash of blue light from his Sumeru space, a treacherous being emerged from inside. It was the human spirit king, Kincaid. The long-haired monsters didn't expect that Zen would hide the human spirit king in his Sumeru space. They immediately became overcome with excitement when they recognized that the treacherous being before them was their king. King, it's our king, Master Kincaid. The long-haired monsters gathered around him excitedly. Get out of the way. Hilario barked irritably. After the long-haired monsters retreated a distance, Hilario gently lifted Kincaid from the ground. As a sleeping-type treacherous being, Kincaid did not show any resistance whatsoever. Hilario tried to awaken him. Master Kincaid. Master Kincaid, look, this is your daughter. Can you see her? Can you wake up? As strange as it seemed, it was common practice to wake up treacherous beings by using their loved ones. Each treacherous being had differing obsessions, so they couldn't be awakened in the same way. For example, Xian, the bird spirit king, who had a strong tendency of self-destruction, definitely couldn't be awakened in this way. In the past, Kincaid was known to cherish his family the most, so this method had a good chance of working. Eyeing the father she'd never met, Dorothy felt a little nervous. Although she was actually the reincarnation of his daughter, her memories of the previous life didn't come with her. Thus, this father was a total stranger to her. Dorothy had been brought up by Yasmin since she was a child, and she had been well taken care of in the Origin Mountain. It could be said that she was the apple of everyone's eye back home, but at the back of her mind, she hoped to see her parents all this time. Now that she stood before her father, she felt mixed feelings. Inside the treacherous being's body, Kincaid did not have a clear perception of the outside world. He was trapped in the cage of obsession, and his children had been his strongest obsession. When Dorothy was presented in front of him, alive, this information was like a beacon of light that shone into his dark world. The cage that bound him started to break little by little. Has he woken up? One of the long-haired monsters grumbled after waiting for a long while. Shut up. The remaining long-haired monsters glared at him fiercely, shutting him up immediately. Just then, Kincaid slowly raised his hand and stroked Dorothy's face. His eyes opened slowly, only to reveal tears streaming down his face. Although the general atmosphere had been a bit glum, what with the news of Zen losing the irregular heavy sword, once they saw the human spirit king wake up, the mood instantly brightened. At least, they finally completed their mission. Kincaid stared at Dorothy's face for a long while, his eyes filled with affection. Then, he slowly shifted his gaze to Zen. "Young man, are you the one who took me out of the altar?" Kincaid asked. Zen nodded. "Please forgive me, Master Kincaid. I took your sword but failed to keep it. It's in someone else's possession now." Chapter 3809, The New Hope. Since Kincaid was put into the Sumeru space by Zen, he was completely cut off from the outside world. He didn't realize that his sword had already been lost until Zen told him. As he heard this piece of news, his hand greatly trembled and a look of extreme surprise appeared on his face. It fell into the hands of the Snake Spirit King. "No, it is an existence that is even far stronger than the Snake Spirit King," Zen replied. Then, Zen took the liberty of telling him what had happened in his battle against the humanoid being. When Zen mentioned the ancestry-level bloodline, Kincaid wasn't able to hide his excitement. He was just as thrilled as the others from the Bold Conjecture House. Afterward, the topic went back to Elder Shui, and Zen repeated what he had said to the others. Hearing all of this, Kincaid wasn't able to keep his calm for a long time. The development of the situation was far beyond his expectation. They were in such a precarious condition, and even time was their enemy. Since a long time ago, Kincaid had hated Cornelius to the core. Even if he racked his mind, he couldn't figure out a sensible reason why Cornelius wanted to destroy the Four Spirits sect. But now, the mystery had been revealed. He came to understand everything. Just as Zen had said, the downgrader was a warrior from the world of a higher grade, and once he got a hold of the irregular heavy sword, no one would probably have the chance to defeat him. Since the downgrader could downgrade the world from a higher grade to a lower one, his strength should be something that we can't fight against. Then, why is he hiding behind Cornelius's shadow? Kincaid was a little confused about this part. "I think it is because he has lost a large portion of his strength, and the heavy sword was his way to make up for it," Zen replied. "My basis for saying that is because the deep space hasn't been completely downgraded yet, and only a small portion of the main world has been downgraded." Zen was pointing out that if the downgrader possessed all of his original power, there was no need for him to manipulate the Snake Spirit King. He could just directly perform the downgrade. "I get your point. If that's the case, he will begin the downgrade after he got my sword, right?" Kincaid emphasized. After all, he was a creature of the main world. Living in the third-grade world made him feel restricted as if his eyes were blindfolded. "You're right. Even before he got the sword, the downgrade has already begun. He wants to control the entire chaos and expand it outwards," Zen explained. Although this was just speculation at first, it had been later confirmed by the ancestry-level bloodline. The ancestry-level bloodline had once described the process of downgrading to Zen. At first, it would seem to begin from a bead of water dropping into a pond, which would then create a small bubble. Then, this bubble would expand indefinitely until it finally drained all the water in the entire pond. When the bubble occupied all the space that originally belonged to the water in pond, it was when the downgrade was completed. After the downgrader came to the main world, he was only able to trick the four-spirit sect through the Snake Spirit King. Perhaps, his strength was not enough, or maybe he had lost some of his abilities. One could only speculate on the real reason behind it. Then, the four-spirit sect, completely unaware of the downgrader's ploy, sent out the world builders to drop the beads of water to create bubbles. However, the bubbles they created could not expand indefinitely. Kincaid took a deep breath to process all the information he acquired. Then out of nowhere, he asked a question that everyone had overlooked. Where is Elder Shui now? Where did he go after he came to the chaos? He wanted to know whether Elder Shui was dead or alive. In his mind, the whereabouts of the Elder might somehow give them a clue that would lead to something. The eyes of the long-haired monsters gazed upon the top of Zen's head. Actually, only the Grand Supreme Elderly Lord had come into contact with Elder Shui. He came to the Jade Pure Realm and sent me a message through a dream, telling me to travel through the main world. Then, he just left without saying anything. There was no information about where he would go afterward, the Grand Supreme Elderly Lord answered. He didn't tell you where he went. Kincaid rubbed his chin and thought for a while before asking, was it his real self that came, or only an avatar of him? This question stumped the Grand Supreme Elderly Lord. He never thought of paying attention to this seemingly minor detail at that moment. After all, he was hiding in the Jade Pure Realm at that time. With the sudden appearance of such an important person, he became so excited that he ignored all other details. However, he was a powerful Eternal Realm warrior, so the memories hidden in his soul would also be indelible. With that, the Grand Supreme Elderly Lord quickly closed his eyes and searched for his memories of the past. As he opened his eyes, a strange expression was visibly seen on his face. He then said, Elder Shui did appear very suddenly. At that time, I thought that he used the grand teleportation to come over, and when he left, his disappearance was even more sudden. It seemed that he just literally vanished before my eyes, without causing any space fluctuations. Upon hearing what the Grand Supreme Elderly Lord said, Kincaid's eyes lit up. He must have used the heaven projection, which could project him in a lower-grade world. It seems that Elder Shui didn't personally come to you. But what about the grand weapon refining method and the golden page that he gave me? The Grand Supreme Elderly Lord still had doubts. It's not difficult for him to pass these down to you through his projection, Kincaid said confidently. Elder Shui is very likely to be alive. He's still probably in the deep space. At this point, Hilario couldn't help but interrupt Kincaid. He thought that they had been off the topic for some time now. Master Kincaid, I don't think this is the time to talk about whether Elder Shui is alive or not. Forgive my presumptuousness, but how should we deal with the downgrader now? Even Zen, who has absorbed the ancestry-level bloodline and obtained your sword, was defeated by him. Of course, Kincaid knew that their current situation was very dangerous. One could even say that their lives were hanging by a thread that could break at any minute. All of the currently present long-haired monsters had stayed in this damned place for so long, still hoping that one day, they would be able to return to the main world. He could feel how disappointed they were when they realized that all their hopes were utterly destroyed. However, Kincaid was a person who was beyond exceptional. He had always been calm and perceptive even when faced with overwhelming pressure. Moreover, he never failed to exhibit a gentle and elegant aura. After all, his perspective as the leader of the human spirit sect was to always keep a level head even when facing the worst situations. There is more than one powerful sword in the deep space, Kincaid said abruptly. The long-haired monsters were all surprised to hear this. You mean that there's a second one? Hilario couldn't help but exclaim. Kincaid nodded and said, well, it's not necessarily a sword, but I'm sure that another weapon like the heavy sword exists. It might be a saber, a spear, or anything, but it definitely is out there. How are you so sure about this, Master Kincaid? Zen asked, knowing that this was a matter of great importance. Kincaid smiled faintly and started explaining. The layout of the deep space is completely different from that of the main world. In the main world, the four-spirit sect was the dominant force, while in the deep space, the power was only divided between the Cinnabar race and Fostering race. These two great races had been fighting with each other for countless years, and the war between them continued until the deep space finally collapsed. It must mean that these two races were evenly matched in terms of strength, Zen speculated. But it's still hard to believe that during that long-term war, neither of the two sides was able to gain the upper hand. Usually, one side will inevitably continue to rise and the other one will decline. It's very difficult to maintain such a balance. That is correct in normal circumstances. Kincaid continued, what maintained the balance between the two great forces were the heavy sword that belonged to the emperor of the Cinnabar race, and the other object, with almost the same prowess as the sword, that belonged to the fostering race. This was not something that Kincaid just deduced. Back then, when he obtained the sword of the Cinnabar race, he was also able to obtain some information indicating that the fostering race had the same weapon, which granted them the power to withstand the Cinnabar race. Of course, Kincaid became curious and tried to look for it, but he didn't succeed. After all, the broken deep space was a vast and extremely dangerous place. Realizing what Kincaid was trying to say, Zen butted in, now, we have to search for this weapon, right? Kincaid nodded repeatedly. That's why I have to make sure that Elder Shui is still alive and is still somewhere in the deep space. No one among us can return to the main world, meaning that we also can't reach the deep space. If we want to find this object, we can only rely on him. Everyone was amazed at how fast Kincaid was able to come up with a feasible solution. Just now, everyone was still immersed in despair and felt that the situation was completely hopeless. Even Zen was almost on the brink of giving up. However, Kincaid was the only one who was not affected by the oppressive pressure that the situation was bringing. In fact, he was able to find a glimmer of hope in a very short time. He was really born with tremendous talents that could turn the tables just when everything seemed to be already falling apart. Chapter 3810, The End of the World. A sense of relief washed over those gathered in the passageway. They knew the chances were slim with what Kincaid said, but at least there was a possibility. But even if Elder Shui was alive, how would we get in touch with him? Hilario pointed out. It was a serious question and a realistic concern, though it sounded pessimistic. They were in the third grade world now. They'd have to cross the main world to enter the deep space and reach Elder Shui. But the entire main world had become a barren wasteland after the calamity Cornelius brought upon it. Neither the treacherous beings nor the long-haired monsters could return. New creatures and races had appeared in the main world over time, but they were entirely different to those in the past. The long-haired monsters looked hopefully at Kincaid, as well. They were eagerly waiting for a definite answer, too. They were more afraid of having no purpose in life than death itself. They would dedicate themselves to any goal Kincaid gave them. A look of hesitation flashed across Kincaid's face. If they couldn't enter the main world, then they couldn't reach the deep space. There was no way to communicate with Elder Shui unless he reached out himself using the heaven projection. Master Kincaid, we have 2 human beings in the main world, Zen offered. You have people there? Kincaid looked surprised. But if they haven't gone through the Red Jade Rite, wouldn't it be difficult for them to move around in the main world? The Red Jade Rite was an exclusive method of the Four Spirits sect allowing creatures from the 3rd grade world to enter the 4th grade world. But if even the Four Spirits sect could no longer use the Red Jade Rite, how could anyone else? One of them indeed has been rendered immobile, but the other, my son, can walk freely throughout the main world even without having undergone the Red Jade Rite, Zen responded. Really? Kincaid's eyes lit up. Where is he now? He has climbed to the top of a holy pillar, Zen said. Kincaid looked impressed. It's amazing someone from the secondary world was able to get that far. I once captured some powerhouses of the 3rd grade world and let them into the main world. However, they immediately lost their sight and hearing as soon as they entered there without going through the rite. The Red Jade Rite was a method created by the Bold Conjecture House which had concluded, based on many experiments, that the 3rd grade world creatures could only survive in the 3rd grade world. They were unable to inhabit the main world without external intervention. Powerful individuals like Zia had tried many times, but even he could only barely walk in the main world. Would we be able to contact him? Kincaid pressed, harboring none of the doubts his companions had on what Zen said. Zen thought for a moment. Yes, he can deliver information through another shore token, but he is unable to do that of late as he is adjusting its ability. Kincaid was ecstatic. Great, he began clapping. Anyone who knew Kincaid knew of his habit of clapping his hands when he was excited. Fate truly works in mysterious ways. The deep space should have been beyond us, but now, we have this chance. We must seize it, Kincaid said, beaming. As things were settling down at the passageway, the other shore was in a state of chaos. The golden light columns that had appeared had thrown all the inhabitants of stage 33 of the other shore in a state of panic. What kind of theurgy was it that it could even directly pierce through the other shore? The Grand Master of Heaven and the Element Spirit Civilization had been the first to see this threat coming. They had not personally participated in the battle that had happened in the Jade Pure Realm, but they knew it would impact the other shore tremendously. The Element Spirit Civilization had been hoping that the Snake Spirit sect would win. The Grand Master of Heaven was thinking how to negotiate with the monkey spirit sect after the bird spirit sect had secured victory in battle. He had been monitoring the situation from the Supreme Pure Realm when he noticed that the water in the Divine River began to flow backwards. It was a first in all of history. He knew it signaled great turmoil in the Jade Pure Realm. Just then, black circular shadows appeared in the sky. Purple-black energy spheres started pouring down from them. These energy spheres were powerful and near unstoppable. They had just decimated the Jade Pure Realm and had now leaked through to the Supreme Pure Realm. They would soon ravage the entire other shore if left unhampered. The humanoid creature had no intention of stopping at present. A purple light appeared in the distance and began to spread. As it did, a huge bird-shaped treacherous being appeared in front of the humanoid creature. It was the bird spirit king, Xian, who remained unawakened. Xian, in fact, could never be awakened. He was already under the complete control of the humanoid creature. According to his plan, if the snake spirit king failed, the humanoid creature would use the bird spirit king instead. In the battle with Zen, the humanoid creature had used a clever method to grab the sword, so the bird spirit king never had a chance to fight. Instead of killing him, however, the humanoid creature chose to just use him as a mount. Xian lowered his head obediently while the humanoid creature stepped onto his back. Since the energy spheres had completely devastated the Jade Pure Realm, the humanoid creature had been able to see to the Supreme Pure Realm. The energy spheres had also allowed him to find the Grand Master of Heaven from far away. As soon as the Grand Master of Heaven spotted the humanoid creature in the distant sky, he froze in shock. He had braced himself for this, but now it was here, and it seemed to be 100 times worse than he had ever imagined. The entire Jade Pure Realm was destroyed, and the bird spirit king was enslaved by that strange creature. How could things have gotten this bad? The humanoid creature's sharp eyes fell on the Grand Master of Heaven. It sent chills down his spine. The Grand Master of Heaven hurriedly took out the descending ring. He knew the sensible thing to do right now was to get away and keep himself safe. After all, his greatest protector had already fallen. The humanoid creature just scoffed seeing the Grand Master of Heaven scramble to escape. His mocking laughter rang through the air as he rode the bird spirit king away. The Grand Master of Heaven gritted his teeth and hissed in humiliation. As the leader of the Nihility race, he was held in high esteem on the other shore. But now, he was looked down upon. He had the sudden urge to fight the humanoid creature. But he soon snapped out of it as he noticed more purple-black energy spheres falling around him. He activated the descending ring and disappeared from the Supreme Pure Realm. As this happened, the purple-black energy spheres also started appearing in the sky of the Grand Pure Realm. Many other shore races in the Grand Pure Realm were gripped with horror upon seeing them. They never imagined the Three Purities stage would be destroyed. Some of the other shore creatures quickly began to flee toward stage 32 of the other shore, the Grand Plain stage, but most of them were paralyzed by shock. By the time they gathered their wits about them, it was too late. They could do nothing but watch as their lives, their friends and family, and their homeland for billions of years were wiped out in a snap. Chapter 3811, Survivors. In the Source World, on a black ship, a golden ring suddenly appeared. From below this golden ring, a figure then emerged. It was the Grand Master of Heaven. "Gee, Grand Master of Heaven, what business do you have here?" asked Shira as she strode towards him, astonished by his arrival. People from the other shore would usually inform the black ship first before they showed up. Only after the crew had made the arrangements would they land at the world. Since the Grand Master of Heaven had shown up unannounced, Shira suspected something major must have happened on the other shore. "The Three Purities stage has collapsed to ruins," revealed the Grand Master of Heaven with pure shock written all across his face. He was having trouble believing what took place himself. He had been to the Jade Pure Realm before and knew what the treacherous beings were capable of. But even so, destroying the Three Purities stage was not easy work. "What did you say?" Shira covered her mouth, overtaken by surprise. "The Three Purities stage represents the top force on the other shore, how could it come to such an end?" She wondered. "Who's responsible for the destruction? Is it the Snake Spirit King?" A voice came from beside the Grand Master of Heaven. A dark green grass then began growing rapidly on the deck and blooming, before a bean pod formed. The pod opened and a green creature came out. The blurry figure cleared into the evil god. It was he who threw these questions at the Grand Master of Heaven. The Grand Master of Heaven looked on at him in admiration on seeing his ability to create his appearance in that way. "This guy is really quite proficient in the laws of the Source World. I heard he can possess other creatures and live within them. It now seems he is able to materialize a living being of his own and appear like this," thought the Grand Master of Heaven to himself. It was not the Snake Spirit King. It's someone with a strange appearance. He is humanoid, replied the Grand Master of Heaven, shaking his head. Who is he? Where is he from? Asked the evil god with his head tilted in curiosity. I have no clue, answered the Grand Master of Heaven with a deep frown. What, even you do not know who he is? Questioned the evil god with raised eyebrows. He was even more arrogant than before. In his eyes, the Grand Master of Heaven was someone to provide him with any useful information he might need. If he couldn't even do that, he was useless to him. I wasn't in the Jade Pure Realm when the fight broke out, and so I have no knowledge of what took place there, the Grand Master of Heaven responded with his eyebrows furrowed, disappointed by his ignorance. He could tell by his voice and expression that the evil god did not take him seriously and that no doubt got under his skin. What about the bird spirit sect? What became of the bird spirits? Inquired the evil god. The bird spirit king could not even defend himself and is now under that creature's control, answered the Grand Master of Heaven. The bird spirit sect had fallen apart, leaving the Nihility race without protection. The Grand Master of Heaven replied only to the evil god. Considering his current situation, he had no choice but to endure his ill treatment. What, you mean to say that even the bird spirit king was controlled? Repeated the evil god as a seriousness began filling his eyes. He knew what the monkey spirit king was capable of and assumed the bird spirit king was around the same level in terms of strength. However, since the Grand Master of Heaven knew little about the humanoid creature, the evil god could not be sure of his strength. Just then, another golden ring emerged above the center of the ship. The evil god, the Grand Master of Heaven and Shira all looked up at the same time. Who else is coming? Are there any survivors in the Jade Pure Realm? Wondered the three of them, surprised by what was unfolding. The outline of a huge bird then became visible beneath the golden ring. It is a bird master, guessed the evil god with a new light in his eyes. Before long, one of the bird masters of the bird spirit sect came into view. It was none other than Duran. Master Duran, you. Duran's presence caught the Grand Master of Heaven by great surprise. The Jade Pure Realm has been destroyed. I was lucky to have made it out alive, Duran announced indifferently, a visible sadness in his eyes. What about the other bird masters? Inquired the Grand Master of Heaven. Lawler and Orville didn't make it. In fact, all those who tried attacking the Snake Spirit sect died at the hands of the Downgrader, answered Duran flatly. Zen had proposed holding on to the bird master's coordinates before they set foot in the Jade Pure Realm. The bird spirit sect stood on the opposite side of the human race after all. Duran had handed his coordinates over to Zen and they were destroyed when the energy balls hit the monkey spirit king. But just as Sewell did, Duran had two sets of coordinates and he could travel back and forth between them. After he was killed and his coordinates were removed, Duran was resurrected using his second set of coordinates. They were placed on the edge of the Jade Pure Realm and although the energy balls shone on the Jade Pure Realm, they did not reach its corner. Duran chose to come to the Source World using the descending ring after his rebirth. The Downgrader, is he that powerful? The evil god asked. Last time Duran had arrived at the Source World, he tried to lure him to their side. But now those hopes had disappeared and the plans no longer existed. The Downgrader is far stronger than you could imagine. His strength is beyond everyone in the main world. We are done for. We just have to accept it, said Duran in despair. The Grand Master of Heavens and Shira's hearts both stopped in fear when they heard these words. Is the Downgrader really so powerful? They both wondered. The evil god, however, smiled, seeming unfazed by all this. Is that so? Is he really all that difficult to deal with that we ought to just give in? You're just a creature of the third grade world. You can't even comprehend all that goes on in the main world. Do you honestly think you'll be any kind of match for a being from the deep space? Duran blurted, impatient with his challenging words. He had never cared for the evil god's arrogance. Now that he felt they would all die, he felt no need to keep up the act and spoke his true feelings. His retorts did not bother the evil god. The evil god snapped his fingers and a wisp of cyan flames appeared. Is this one of the bloodline powers in the main world? Asked the evil god tauntingly. With a glance at the fire, Duran responded, the sixth ability of the destruction quadrant. That's no big deal. Don't waste my time showing that off in front of me. The evil god snapped his fingers and another flame arose, this time purple. This is also a bloodline power of the main world, right? He asked again. The third ability of the destruction quadrant, Duran snorted defiantly. These two types of fire were among the most common abilities obtained from the ancestry-level bloodline, so Duran recognized them at a glance. But he had missed a significant detail. Where had the evil god acquired these bloodline powers? The Grand Master of Heaven had not ignored it though. Evil God, you have never been to the eternal scroll painting. How did you get your hands on those? He asked, staring at him incredulously. The Grand Master of Heaven's words brought something to Duran's mind. Where did you get the bloodline powers? Did you reach the eternal realm in the source world? He asked, narrowing his eyes at the evil god. As far as he knew, although there were eternal realm warriors in the source world, the root-level bloodlines they had inherited were garbage. Even if the evil god reached the eternal realm, acquiring the two flames that he had displayed was impossible. He too now began wondering how he had come to possess these two bloodline powers. The evil god didn't answer. Instead he smiled and suggested, how about some magic? The third flame. Whoosh! A white fire burst from the evil god's mouth. It was the 12th ability of the destruction quadrant. The three flames quickly intertwined. Did you blend some bloodlines? Duran mused calmly. That he had acquired the bloodline powers was surprising, but blending some bloodlines was not difficult. In the Four Spirit sect, many beings at Duran's level knew how to blend bloodlines. Chapter 3812, The Energy Ball. The evil god remained calm. Once again, he waved his left hand. The fourth flame rose slowly from his palm. Seeing this, the Grand Master of Heaven appeared even more shocked. I heard that the evil god was able to cultivate the 3,000 godly ways. Furthermore, he managed to integrate them. But how did he get his hands on the bloodline powers? Did he get them through the 3,000 godly ways? That would be impossible, the Grand Master of Heaven thought to himself as he stared at the flame. In the blink of an eye, something incredible happened. The fourth flame had instantly merged with the mixture of the other three flames. Soon after, the evil god manifested a faint purple bloodline power. This power was from the life quadrant. Without any sign of hesitation, he combined this with the mixture of the four flames. That's it. Is that the magic you wanted to show me? Duran was already getting impatient. The evil god's performance of blending the bloodlines meant nothing to him. He actually found it quite boring. Be patient and watch, replied the evil god with a confident smile. Out of nowhere, they heard a swishing sound. Phew, they heard it one after another. The evil god snapped his fingers several times. Each time, more bloodline powers kept appearing. They immediately merged with the mixture of those he had shown before. Duran was utterly bewildered when he saw so many different kinds of blood powers. He pondered upon this. The evil god is incredible. How was he able to obtain that many kinds of bloodline powers? He blended about 30 bloodline powers. Afterward, it formed a black and red ball. It began to expand for a second and then shrunk the next. It was like a human's heart beating madly. It seemed like it might explode at any point in time. Shira and the Grand Master of Heaven were very apprehensive about the energy contained inside the ball. If the ball exploded, it wouldn't kill the evil god and Duran. After all, the evil god had infinite avatars and Duran was a treacherous being. On the other hand, Shira and the Grand Master of Heaven wouldn't be able to survive the explosion. What on earth is this? Duran asked with furrowed brows. In fact, he didn't understand why the evil god would show this to him. Based from his observation, it was not that easy for the evil god to blend the energies. Moreover, the power of the destruction quadrant was extremely unstable. He wondered what the purpose of the evil god was for doing this. The black and red ball sprang from the evil god's hand and traveled for a distance. At that moment, he stretched out his hand and made a cubic space to envelope the ball. The cubic space was stable because it contained the truth energy. Even masters at the Grand Master of Heaven's level would have a hard time breaking it. With a wave of his hand, the evil god made another cubic space and covered the ball. He proceeded to make more spaces to fully wrap the ball. Each cubic space was an inch larger than the previous one. The evil god didn't stop until he acquired 50 layers of it. Meanwhile, Duran, the Grand Master of Heaven, and Shira remained silent. All they could do was watch. They decided to wait patiently and see what the evil god was up to. They were compelled to do so by their curiosity and the fact that they didn't have any choice. Afterward, the evil god pointed at the ball inside the cubic spaces. Suddenly, he shouted, "Explode!" Sizzle, boom, a loud booming sound reached their ears. The black and red ball exploded within the cubic spaces. Raging fire filled the insides. The upper layer was engulfed in light green flames. Meanwhile, the lower layer was a swirling vortex. The two forces eroded each other. That was incredible, Shira exclaimed. Her eyes lit up with amazement. The flames were trapped within the 50 cubic spaces. Therefore, she was not afraid of getting hurt anymore. The flames continued to move down. Finally, the first layer of cubic space couldn't withstand them any longer. They heard a muffled sound. After that, the first layer of cubic space disappeared into thin air. It was immediately followed by the second, third, and fourth layers. Simply put, the cubic spaces were now collapsing. As they did, the flames became more violent. Evil God, over 20 cubic spaces have been broken, reminded the Grand Master of Heaven. However, the evil God remained composed and calm as he stared at the flames. Focus on the fire. He gestured at the Grand Master of Heaven to remain silent. In a mere couple seconds, more than 20 spaces vanished. If it continued at this rate, the fire would be able to break all of the cubic spaces soon. The power of space emerged from Shira. As soon as the fire broke free, she would immediately escape. Meanwhile, the Grand Master of Heaven didn't do that. He thought that it would be embarrassing. He was at the eternal realm. If he acted like Shira, it would mean that he was a coward. Hence, he pretended to be calm even though he felt really anxious. When there were only 2 cubic spaces left, the flames stopped spreading. Soon enough, they began to vanish. After the flames disappeared, they left a black and red item inside the cubic spaces. It looked like an ore. What is that? Is it an ore? Duran's curiosity was aroused. All the bird masters were incredibly sensitive. He had a feeling that it was not a common ore. The evil god put his hand into the square spaces. He carefully took out the black and red ore. At the same time, he spoke, "This thing is very powerful. I will show you what it can do." The evil god threw the ore into the distance. As it rotated in the air, he released a streak of lightning. The lightning struck the ore. At that moment, the ore exploded and turned into an energy ball. Its diameter was hundreds of feet long. Unbelievable. This is. The Grand Master of Heaven's eyes almost popped out as he saw the energy ball. Disbelief and astonishment were written all over his face. Even though Duran remained silent, he was obviously shaken up by what he just witnessed. He realized that the energy ball released by the evil god was similar to those that the downgrader had shown. "What is the matter, sir?" Shira asked the Grand Master of Heaven confusedly. "That energy ball is exactly the same as those that obliterated the entire 3 purities stage," replied the Grand Master of Heaven. His eyes were fixed at the area where it exploded. Shira's eyes widened in shock. She felt the power of this energy ball. Yet, she found it hard to believe that it could reduce the entire 3 purities stage into ruins. "I understand now. This is the power of the 5th grade world. It's from the deep space." Duran made an eye-opening realization. He fixed his eyes upon the evil god and asked excitedly, "How? How did you make it? How were you able to get that power?" The evil god smiled confidently. "I think you should ask me how I acquired the bloodline powers first." "Fine, how did you get them then?" Duran inquired immediately. He couldn't keep the excitement from his voice. The evil god tilted his head and raised one hand above his shoulder. "The ways blending energy is the origin of all the energies in the chaos," he replied calmly. As he said that, the colorful ways blending energy grew bigger in the evil god's hand. Even the 6 truth powers are born from the ways blending energy. Thus, the ways blending energy is the foundation of all materials. To sum it up, the ways blending energy and the bloodline powers in the main world are the same thing. Therefore, the 2 things can change into one another, continued the evil god. "What? That can't be right." Duran shook his head as he retorted determinedly. As a matter of fact, the people of the Bold Conjecture House had long come up with the theory that the evil god just told him. However, the bird masters were not interested in these theoretical things back then. Therefore, Duran didn't hear about this theory. When he heard what the evil god said, he thought he was merely talking nonsense. Duran might believe it if he heard it directly from the intelligent scholars of the Bold Conjecture House. The members of the Bold Conjecture House worked out lots of theories and did lots of experiments. Unfortunately, no one was able to prove those theories back then. The evil god smiled ambiguously. He put his palm down so that it faced the ground. The godly way energy came out through his fingers. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of kinds of godly way energy appeared. It was quite easy for the evil god to do that. "Watch this first, then tell me later what you think," answered the evil god mysteriously. Chapter 3813, Extreme Form and Field. The godly way energy that was rising out from his fingertips danced around in the air before slowly merging into a delicate ring. "What kind of bloodline do you have, Master Duran?" the evil god asked. Duran understood what the evil god wanted to do. He gently flapped his left wing, and a brilliant light flew out from the edges of his sharp feathers. The bloodline he possessed was of a mixed kind. It had the abilities of space-time and life quadrants. Theoretically, the fusion of just 3 bloodline abilities wasn't much impressive, but it was still quite useful. In fact, Duran was the only one in the Four Spirits sect who had managed to master this fusion. The evil god glanced at Duran's wings and in response, 10 wisps of godly way energy rose out from his fingertips as well. They also started to merge into the ring. The whole process was being done very skillfully, and the dexterity here was definitely worth witnessing. Whoosh! The ring trembled slightly, and a strand of brilliant light began flowing around it. You possess a bloodline theurgy concerning bodily movement skill. It's very useful, the evil god commented. Duran's body froze when he saw the familiar brilliance of the light. The blended bloodline he possessed was exclusive to the Four Spirits sect, or more precisely, exclusive to him. But the evil god had managed to master it with just a few glances. He couldn't believe his eyes. Is this how you restore the bloodline powers? The Grand Master of Heaven was visibly excited at the prospect of witnessing something new. How are you able to do it so skillfully? The evil god calmly infused more godly way energy into the ring, and the bloodline power inside it continued to change. He replied indifferently, I restore the godly way energy to the bloodline powers. It is something I've practiced millions of times, and therefore, comes naturally to me. It's a piece of cake. The difficult task is restoring them to a higher level of power, by which I mean the power of the deep space that Duran mentioned. After saying that, the evil god raised up his hand and pointed towards the side of the ship. In the huge square that lay in the distance, tens of thousands of avatars of the evil god were busy doing their jobs. When the first avatar had proposed the concept of restoring, it had attracted the attention of the evil god. As a rather sensitive person, he had immediately asked all of his avatars to drop whatever they were doing and focus solely on studying possible methods of restoration. In order to speed up the task, the evil god had also been creating more and more avatars to divide and conquer. Very soon, 3 of the avatars had managed to discover the secrets of the restoration and isolated a unique kind of bloodline power. Although things had been difficult at the beginning, after the first step, they had started becoming simpler. Soon after that, they had got their hands on the second, the third, and the fourth bloodline powers. You can restore all the bloodline powers? Duran asked. Yes, there are 373 kinds, and I can get my hands on all of them. The evil god was continuously infusing the godly way energy into the ring, and now, a new bloodline power was formed from the ring. It was releasing layers of diamond-shaped sources of light. When Duran saw these diamond-shaped flashes, there was a glint of something in his eyes, something that looked a lot like fury. He was feeling greatly threatened. As long as the diamond-shaped flashes of light continued to shoot out, there was no possible way for him to escape. He coldly spoke up, this bloodline power. It can completely restrain your bloodline theurgy, but please don't take this the wrong way. I'm just demonstrating my capabilities. The evil god clapped his hands. The ring dissipated, and the bloodline power also disappeared in the blink of an eye. Directly restoring the 3,000 godly ways to all 373 bloodline powers. Duran muttered, I cannot believe there is a genius who thought of that. I would have considered it impossible were I not seeing it with my own eyes. It should be noted that the warriors of the Four Spirits sect had to kneel down in front of the ancestry-level bloodline to beg so that it would bestow upon them its power. Those who had been able to obtain even a single one of the various energies had already progressed and were now outstanding warriors of the Four Spirits sect. If they managed to fuse several unique bloodline powers at the same time, they would become one of the elites of the Four Spirits sect. The Four Kings had been racking their brains to find or obtain the full abilities of the ancestry-level bloodline. However, they hadn't succeeded, and then, the Four Spirits sect had been destroyed. They could now only look at the ancestry-level bloodline with regret. However, this evil god had used the 3,000 godly ways to restore the ancestry-level bloodline. But how could there be such a thing in the world? The Grand Master of Heaven had proclaimed himself to be one of the most powerful warriors of the Nihility race, and he was also one of the most intelligent people from the human race. Now that he was standing in front of the evil god, even he suddenly felt a sense of inferiority. He was facing someone whose intelligence was beyond even his imagination. The evil god himself paid no attention to Duran's shocked expression, and continued nonchalantly, the power of the deep space is a level higher than that of the main world. It exists in various, extreme forms. Extreme forms? The Grand Master of Heaven was confused. You won't be able to understand that. The evil god chose not to explain it and refused directly. This was something that even Duran, who hailed from a 4th grade world, couldn't understand, much less the Grand Master of Heaven who was from a 3rd grade world. In short, the energy ball I released before was a kind of destructive form. At the moment, I can only get this form through restoration. According to my estimate, there are over 100 different extreme forms in the deep space. That number is about half that of the bloodline powers. The higher grade a world was, the less kinds of energy there would be inside it, and the more difficult it would be to find or create them through restoration. Compared to the bloodline power, the power of extreme forms in the deep space was extremely difficult to obtain, even for the evil god. That's all well and good, but with only this kind of power on your side, I'm afraid you are no match for the downgrader. Duran quickly calmed down. Through his sword, the downgrader can use various kinds of powers of the deep space, or as you just said, various, extreme forms. Give me enough time, and I will be able to do it, the evil god replied. With his extraordinary talent, he could obtain more extreme forms by learning from his previously successful experiences. After obtaining the first, extreme form, in the deep space, the difficulties he had met before could be easily solved. Moreover, I've already touched the power that is a level higher than that of the deep space. Hearing that, the Grand Master of Heaven and Duran couldn't help but exchange a gaze. Shira, who was standing beside them, was also puzzled. She had only felt that the power of the evil god was beyond her imagination, as he had easily suppressed the Grand Master of Heaven and Duran. And right now, she was even more confused. What was the guy talking about? Did he just say that the power of the deep space was not the strongest? Yes, there is a higher level of power, and no, it is not also extreme form, the evil god continued to explain. It's called the field. All powers exist in the form of field. Both Duran and the Grand Master of Heaven had nothing to say now. What the evil god was talking about was beyond their comprehension, and they didn't know what they should ask. In the primitive land, the snake goddess and the others were still under the bloody sky. They didn't know what was happening on the other shore. The fact that Zen hadn't returned yet made them uneasy, but there was nothing they could do. The snake goddess tried calling for the ancestry-level bloodline. In theory, the bloodline should know the situation of the other shore. However, the ancestry-level bloodline didn't respond to her and the others at all. It was as if the bloodline was gone. Thus, Fuxi sat down cross-legged and decided to take a risk and enter the other shore. The moment he entered the other shore, his body fell down rapidly. He should have landed in the Night View Island. After he finally managed to stabilize himself, he looked around and was stunned. His face looked like he had been struck by lightning. The Night View Island. The Jade Pure Realm, they're all gone. There was only some debris around Fuxi, and the big and small Pure Sky platforms had completely disappeared. When he withdrew from the other shore, his face had darkened severely. When the Snake Goddess, Eastern Emperor Tai, and the others asked him what was happening, Fuxi shook his head and told them, "You can go there and see for yourselves. I don't know what or how to say." Thus, the Snake Goddess, Eastern Emperor Tai, and the others hurried towards the other shore. What they saw was a complete void with only debris lying around. Eastern Emperor Tai was as flustered as Fuxi was when he saw this. The whole Jade Pure Realm is just gone. On the contrary, the Snake Goddess calmed down quickly. Zen should be fine. If something had happened to him, the primitive land would not have been so calm. Chapter 3814, The Opportunity to Reverse the Situation. At the Snake Goddess's words, Eastern Emperor Tai smiled and said, "You forgot that his real body is in the primitive land. We'll know for sure once we go take a look." "Of course. Let's go back." As she spoke, the Snake Goddess began to chant the illusion-breaking rune to retreat from the other shore. The sudden disappearance of the Jade Pure Realm had shocked her beyond measure, and she had momentarily forgotten that Zen's physical body was in the Pear Hill. Once they returned to the primitive land, they utilized the grand teleportation to return to the jadeite platform on the Pear Hill. Zen was still there sitting upright, his face ruddy but calm, and his breathing even. The life energy within his body was flowing in all directions. This would make ordinary people feel refreshed if they got close to him and could extend their lifespan. It was truly a relief to see that Zen was safe and sound. The moment Zen had risen to prominence within the Source world, they had come to know his importance. They knew he was their only hope, that no other would do. If he perished, everything would become meaningless. The Jade Pure Realm is gone. Where could Zen be hiding? With his Thurges, he should have entered some sort of space. Even so, he should have returned already. Why wouldn't he have woken up yet? Both spoken words and silent thoughts were revolving around Zen's possible situation. On the jadeite platform, Judson, Gerald and Kendrick also joined the discussion. Since they knew nothing of what happened to the Jade Pure Realm, their discussion went nowhere, so they anxiously waited for Zen to awaken. Fortunately, they didn't have to wait for too long. Several hours later, Zen's eyes slowly blinked open. Finally, you're awake. Zen, are you all right? What on earth happened on the other shore? They crowded around him, throwing a barrage of questions at him without pause. For a moment, Zen wasn't sure how to answer or if he should, but then he asked, where is Madame Yasmin? Dorothy cared the most about Yasmin. She had entered the door to save her grandmother, but Zen had already rescued Yasmin from the other shore before Dorothy. Madame Yasmin is in the sword-reading peak. Why, what's wrong? The snake goddess asked, confused. Many things should have occurred on the other shore, but she wasn't sure why any of those things would have a thing to do with Yasmin. Why did Zen ask for her the moment he woke up? Someone wishes to see her. Please ask her to come, said Zen. The snake goddess was surprised, and she had to take a moment to think over what he had said. Dorothy is still alive, her voice betrayed her shock at the news. She was already aware of Dorothy's disappearance. If there was anyone on the other shore who wanted to see Yasmin, it could only be Dorothy. But why would Dorothy be in the Jade Pure Realm? Did the destruction of the Jade Pure Realm have anything to do with her? I will explain it later, said Zen softly. With that answer, the snake goddess didn't bother to press the issue. She shifted into a bright beam of light, and transported to the sword-reading peak to send for Yasmin. Zen glanced around before asking, where are the descending rings? The descending rings were used to connect the other shore in the chaos. Some rings were in the hands of the real snake goddess and the human heroes on the other shore, but when they had needed the rings to work, they failed. After their failure, they had been devoured by the massive energy balls. Fuxi quickly took out the descending rings and put them in front of Zen. What had once been pure golden rings were now deformed and tarnished, their surface pitted and cracked. With the destruction of the descending rings on the other shore, the real ones in the primitive land had also been severely affected. Zen took the 3 rings, and brought them closer to him. Then he raised his head and said, assist me in repairing them. Energy fluctuations burst from the blood-red sky, and a brilliant golden light was born from it that illuminated the 3 descending rings. When the light touched them, a soft humming sound echoed around them. The bright golden light began to become more solid, condensing into a single column as it healed the descending rings. In a short moment, that felt like forever, they were as good as new. As if they had never been damaged before. When the healing light had faded, another 2 streaks of light shot through the sky at them from the foot of the mountain. It was Yasmin and the snake goddess. Zen, I was told someone wanted to see me. Is it Dorothy? Yasmin asked seriously, a hint of hope in her tone. Fear was etched within the wrinkles of her face. She was afraid of the possible answer. Yes, it's her, replied Zen. Yasmin visibly deflated with relief. She was old, and had lived long enough in her opinion. She didn't care much for the fights occurring on the other shore or the fate of the chaos. Not every Eternal Realm warrior was as selfless as the snake goddess and Fuxi, who fought for the world and those living in it until they couldn't anymore. There was only one person that Yasmin cared for, and that was Dorothy. Ever since Dorothy had disappeared through the door, Yasmin had no news of her and had fallen into a period of depression living alone within the sword-reading peak. This unexpected news gave her hope. Where is she? Where is my granddaughter? Asked Yasmin in a rush. Holding the descending rings carefully in his hands, Zen closed his eyes and started to activate the truth of godly way. You will see her soon. The air picked up around them, whistling softly. The next moment, Zen appeared in the passageway within the door. Without a word or hesitation, Zen handed the rings to Dorothy, Kincaid and Hilario respectively, and the 3 of them began to descend. The air grew warm, and a soft buzzing sound reached their ears. 3 figures were outlined below the descending rings, 1 for each ring. As Dorothy attempted to regain her senses after leaving the other shore, she could hear someone calling her name. Her expression crumpled and tears welled in her eyes. Grandma. Dorothy threw herself into her grandmother's arms. Although she was the reincarnation of the daughter of Kincaid, and there was a small connection between them, Yasmin was the one she loved dearly. Fuxi, the snake goddess, Eastern Emperor Tai, and the Chaos Ancient Gods all focused their eyes beyond the reunion to Kincaid and Hilario. It was a white-haired monster and a treacherous being standing there. The faint aura they were releasing was making the others feel stressed and anxious. The snake goddess and Fuxi had seen the human spirits who were in the form of treacherous beings before. For example, the warriors of the 3 houses of the human spirit sect on the Night View Island. However, even Hamilton and Alphonse were far from being able to compare with this one in front of them. Zen, why don't you introduce them to us? The snake goddess said, not looking away from the 2 strangers. Before Zen could reply, Dorothy gestured to Kincaid. Grandma, this is my father. Your father? Yasmin asked in clear disbelief. Zen nodded. This is the human spirit king, Master Kincaid, Dorothy's father, and this is Hilario, the leader of the Bold Conjecture House. The human spirit king was a very famous figure as well as the goal of Zen's trip to the Jade Pure Realm. Kincaid nodded at Yasmin and said, thank you for taking care of Dorothy in the chaos. The human spirit king Kincaid. Dorothy's father. Yasmin was dumbfounded. Although she knew that Dorothy's origin was extraordinary, she was beyond amazed that her father could be the human spirit king. The expressions of the snake goddess, Fuxi and the others were similar, utter surprise. After a short period of silence, they raised their hands in a salute. I'm Snake Goddess. It's a pleasure to meet you, Master Kincaid. I'm Fuxi. Greetings. My name is. Kincaid waved his hand and said, you don't need to be so courteous. You all have helped me. It is thanks to you that I am still alive and could wake up. We're blessed by the deep space. I didn't expect that our human spirits would be saved by the human race in the end. Hilario said softly. Zen then went on to tell them what happened in the Three Purities stage. Only then did the snake goddess, Fuxi and the others know the truth. Then the real versions of ourselves are all dead. Fuxi said, his eyes wide. He had never expected their situation to turn so tragic. The snake goddess on the other hand was as calm as ever. Her sharp mind was going over everything that had been said before she said, so if what you say is true, and the sword fell into the hands of the downgrader, aren't we all doomed to lose then? That is why we came here. We are searching for an opportunity to reverse the situation, Kincaid replied. Is there such an opportunity in the primitive land? Perhaps it is the ancestry-level bloodline. The snake goddess asked, brows scrunched in confusion. It's not the ancestry-level bloodline, Zen said as he pointed in the direction of the ruin graveyard. Our opportunity lies there. Chapter 3815, The Proud Jeffrey. The snake goddess, Fuxi, Eastern Emperor Tai, and the others, were all thrown into a state of confusion. The opportunity to defeat the downgrader was in the ruin graveyard. Although the ruin graveyard was created by the Grand Supreme Elderly Lord's painstaking efforts, after the chaos began to downgrade, it was unable to even survive itself. Did it have what it took to defeat the downgrader once and for all? What were the odds of it coming true? Just as they remained in their spots and made efforts to sort their thoughts out, a bright light suddenly erupted before their eyes from the ruin graveyard. Whoosh! The bright light ascended upwards and pierced through the sky. What was that? Damn, what incredible energy! Who could possibly possess such astounding theurgy in the ruin graveyard? Fuxi, Eastern Emperor Tai, and the three Chaos Ancient Gods kept their gazes fixated at the source of the energy as their eyes glowed from the reflection of the blinding light. Although the Pear Hill was adjacent to the ruin graveyard, there was still a significant amount of distance that separated the two huge lands from each other. Even so, the energy fluctuating from the light was so overpowering that it could be felt through distances far and wide. The power that this beam of light harnessed far surpassed that of the Chaos Ancient Gods and the Eternal Realm Warriors. Whoosh! If the beam of light wasn't contained in time, it could pierce through the sky shrouded in crimson red and reach the ends of the primitive land. However, just as this unstoppable beam of light extended towards the bloody red sky, many obstructions containing energy in the form of green beehives appeared to stop it in its tracks. Although the beam of light was considerably stronger than the beehives, the moment they collided with each other, a clear deafening sound reverberated through the sky and sent vibrations far and wide. The two seemed to have cancelled each other out and later withered away till they vanished out of sight. Is this your doing? Is this the opportunity you were talking about? The snake goddess asked while still gazing at the sky. Zen, too, wore a puzzled expression on his face as he looked into the distance. Fortunately, he had omniscient abilities in the primitive land. As he focused for a brief moment, he learned what had happened, and a smile of relief appeared on his face as his tense expression eased up. It wasn't as who did it, but there's no doubt in my mind that the opportunity is there. Everyone, follow me. With a wave of his hand, Zen wrapped everyone in a layer of space created by him. The next moment, they had teleported inside the ruin graveyard. On a cliff in the ruin graveyard, Rocher stood rooted to his spot with the lone sword in his grip, his eyes wide open in shock. Ever since Jeffrey pulled out the black stone on the holy pillar that was connected to the sword at the other end, the lone sword had lost its old essence as it stopped being responsive and turned into a lifeless scrap of metal. However, Rocher didn't seem to worry about it too much. Jeffrey had told him that he would continue to seek out a stronger power that could strengthen the lone sword. But today, Rocher felt something strange happen to the lone sword. Unusual, intricate patterns painted in a silver-yellow color suddenly began to appear on the surface of the sword. These patterns began to carve themselves into the sword from the bottom and slowly made their way to the top, almost covering the entire sword, giving it a new appearance. Just as he was consumed with confusion concerning the strange behavior of the sword, he felt a vivid surge of energy gushing out from the sword. This power was on a whole other level from what it previously withheld. Before, the overall power of the sword was dangerously violent, which made it hard for Rocher to contain it with his current strength. It was not compatible with his temperament. However, right now, the energy flowing within the lone sword was as endless as a vast ocean. Slowly, it filled his chest like flowing water. Swish, he couldn't help but give the sword a wave in a panicked state. The sheer intensity of the strike left him speechless and shocked. This boundless raw power was something he never expected to wield in his hands. Jeffrey really pulled it off. As a million thoughts raced through his mind to process his current situation, Zen and his group suddenly appeared before his eyes. Zen, listen to me. Jeffrey really did it. This sword, this lone sword has surpassed its previous capabilities and has gotten so powerful. Rocher was so excited that his voice cracked in between his words as he desperately tried to tell Zen in one breath. Zen returned his smile and gave an acknowledging nod. I know, you have succeeded. If the downgrader had never existed, Zen would have been as ecstatic as Rocher felt with his newly acquired power. After all, Rocher would become Zen's strongest aide, standing by his side to support him in the face of any crisis. However, their current enemy was the downgrader, an existence impossible to defeat by simply relying on the power of the main world. Why does such a formidable force exist? It's impossible to make it even with the aid of another shore token from the stage 33 of the other shore. How did Jeffrey manage to make it? Kendrick asked in confusion. In response to his question, Kincaid replied in a rather calm tone, this sword is linked to the sunlight annihilation light. It was once my most powerful holy item. So it's a holy item. Rocher muttered in a tone only audible to himself as he stared deeply at the sword in his hands. He quickly switched his gaze from the sword to Kincaid and asked, wait, you said that this was once your holy item. That must mean that you are. Yes, he is the human spirit king, Kincaid, Zen interrupted Rocher as he introduced him to Kincaid. Jeffrey must have climbed onto the holy pillar of the human spirit sect. With the sudden revelation that now lay bare to him, Rocher remained stunned in place with his mouth wide open. Suddenly, he nodded to himself and took 2 steps in the direction of Kincaid before holding his sword horizontally towards him. If that's the case, then I shall return the sword back to its original owner. Rocher had a dignified personality, he wasn't one to hog someone else's treasure and keep it to himself, so he naturally felt like he had to return it. However, Kincaid put one hand forward, signaling him to stop as he gave him a faint smile and shook his head. It's true that it once belonged to me. However, now, the time has changed, and it has brought about a great change to the world. I no longer own this holy item. It's rightfully yours now. The moment Rocher opened his mouth to say something in response, he was interrupted when he felt a slight movement from the lone sword. It was Jeffrey tugging on the link connected to the holy item from the other end. Jeffrey seems to have something to say. What is it? What's he saying? Zen asked hurriedly, sounding desperate to know. The lone sword was no longer the center of attention. Everyone's concentration shifted towards communicating with Jeffrey through the sword. Everyone remained quiet as Rocher closed his eyes and grasped the lone sword tightly in his grip to perceive what Jeffrey was trying to say. After a while, he wore a dumbfounded expression on his face as he addressed everyone present there. He said, Uncle Rocher, the sword has become really powerful, hasn't it? Are you satisfied with the improvement? The kid was showing off his capabilities with the utmost confidence on the top of the holy pillar. It's amazing. It's so formidable that it's easily the strongest other shore token I have ever seen. Rocher replied to Jeffrey's question wholeheartedly. To insert the black stone into the top of the pillar, Jeffrey had put in a lot of effort. At this moment, he was extremely proud of himself after having heard the positive results. When he found out that his father and some others were also beside Rocher listening in from the other end, he fiddled with the link and continued to boast, if you are not satisfied with it, I can connect it with another one for you. I still have several options here. There's no need for that. Your father wants to speak to you, Rocher said as he handed the lone sword to Zen and stood aside. He could see that Zen and the others were desperate to communicate with Jeffrey. This kind of exchange was strenuous on people on the both ends, so Zen didn't want to waste any time and cut straight to the chase. Jeffrey, it's true that I'm proud of what you've done. Controlling this sword is enough to make your Uncle Rocher the #1 warrior in the chaos, but the enemy we are facing is far stronger. We need your help to defeat it. Stronger, you say? How strong could it even be? Jeffrey replied nonchalantly, seemingly unfazed by Zen's words. Have you ever witnessed the deep space? Zen asked, maintaining his calm demeanor. You mean the remains floating in the sky? Yeah, I've seen it before. I can see it from a certain position of the holy pillar, Jeffrey replied. He could see it when he climbed to the top of the holy pillars of the Snake Spirit Sect and the Human Spirit Sect. It was easily visible from there. Zen continued to explain to Jeffrey the dire situation they were in. The enemy we are about to face is from that place, so we need you to find a person in the deep space, whose surname is Shui. There was another key point to consider in the plan that Kincaid had proposed. Jeffrey could walk freely within the main world, but could he walk freely in the deep space? Whether it was Elder Shui, Kincaid, or Xian, if they entered the deep space, they would find themselves in the exact same situation as Zen when he had entered the main world, as they were rendered sightless and couldn't see anything, and it would be very difficult for them to even walk. This was all because they did not belong to the 5th grade world. Fortunately for Jeffrey, the deep space was in a broken state. A large part of the space had already been downgraded and reduced to the main world, and that was why the 4 Spirits sect had the chance to explore the deep space. The difficulty of the task was the last thing on Jeffrey's mind. Instead, he was eager to prove his usefulness to his father. The deep space is on a significant height. Is there a way I can get there? Chapter 3816, Circles. The deep space and the main world were completely different in so many aspects. With Jeffrey's current strength, it would be impossible for him to cross between them. Well, Zen looked at the Human Spirit King. He didn't even know much about the main world, let alone the deep space. Noticing this, the Human Spirit King immediately said, there is a transmission array at the top of the Eternal Divine Courtyard. Through this, one can go to the deep space. The 4 Spirits sect treated the deep space with great importance. They believed that this place was like a vast land that was filled with precious treasures. Therefore, they had spent a lot of time, effort, and resources building a transmission array in the Eternal Divine Courtyard that would connect them to the deep space. This way, they were able to monopolize the resources that could be found there. The Eternal Divine Courtyard? You mean the courtyard that is chained down? Jeffrey asked out of curiosity. Indeed, Kincaid replied, but wouldn't it be too difficult to activate such a transmission array? Zen was a bit worried. After all, it was a transmission array that linked 2 great worlds. In theory, yes, but you don't have to worry. The energy needed to activate the transmission array is provided by the time lock. As long as Jeffrey can successfully climb and enter the top of the Eternal Divine Courtyard, there is no doubt that he can activate the transmission array, Kincaid remarked confidently. In the main world, there were so many legacies left behind by the 4 Spirits sect that could last forever, unless the entire main world was fully downgraded. Right now, Kincaid was being very patient. He knew that he could not solve this crisis by himself, so he needed to trust and depend on Jeffrey. Although Jeffrey was a human with relatively weak strength, currently, he was the only hope that the whole world could cling to. Then, Kincaid went on to tell Jeffrey in detail everything that he needed to know about the deep space, and what might be waiting for him in that place. Upon hearing Kincaid elaborating the details about the deep space, Zen and the others couldn't help but feel amused. In the eyes of the people from the 3rd grade world, the main world would appear that it was composed of countless snow-white dots of light. On the other hand, if the people from the main world viewed the deep space, they would be able to see a lot of circles floating around. It was inevitable for people from a lower grade world to see a higher grade world from a different perspective. It took Kincaid about 4 hours to finish explaining to Jeffrey everything that he needed to know. In the end, Jeffrey just nodded repeatedly before he left. I hope that Jeffrey can make it this time, the snake goddess said anxiously. Trust him, he will definitely make it. Kincaid had a huge smile as he confidently said this. He always ignored the possibility of failure when facing such a great crisis. This was the only way that he could maximize his full potential into solving anything. Meanwhile, Zen stayed silent. He felt a little guilty that Jeffrey was the one who had to take this huge risk and pressure. But at the same time, he was also deeply rooting for him. Right now, the entire chaos didn't have anything but him to count on. There was no other choice. Noticing that everyone had been a little depressed about the situation, Kincaid turned to Rocher with a smile and said, the power of the sunlight annihilation light is exceptional. Let me teach you how to activate its full potential. Yes, Master Kincaid, please enlighten me, Rocher immediately responded as he cupped his hands. Then, Kincaid took the lone sword from Rocher. He gently clenched it, and the patterns on the surface of the sword gradually fluctuated and became brighter, eventually turning into endless energy flowers that bloomed successively. It's not actually difficult to control the sunlight annihilation light. When using its energy, you just have to separately release it, and then merge it into one. After explaining this, Kincaid lightly tapped the hilt of the sword. Swish, swish, bright light beams the size of fingers suddenly shot out and flickered into a shape of a gourd before converging together. Buzz, buzz, the accumulated sword radiance seemed to become viscous, thus reducing its speed by more than half. But soon after, it transformed into a strange form, splitting into hundreds of beams that shot out through the sky. These beams contained a special law that kept soaring, dazzling everyone who saw them. Meanwhile, as Kincaid was still teaching Rocher, Geoffrey had already arrived at the edge of the pillar and started crawling along the chain. He had trod on the chain of the time lock several times before, so he had easily adapted to its terrain. About 2 days later, he finally crossed the chain and was able to climb up to the eternal divine courtyard right in the middle of the 4 pillars. The human spirit king said there is a magic array on the roof of the eternal divine courtyard, but I didn't find it before. Previously, Geoffrey had been thinking about how he could enter the chained courtyard. After searching for a way in and eventually failing, he gave up exploring it. This time, he went straight to the roof. The main hall of the eternal divine courtyard was octagonal in shape, with a circle of protruding tiles in the middle of it. Right after passing the tiles, he saw a platform that was about 30 feet long. At the 4 corners of this platform, 4 chains of the time lock were fixed. Geoffrey observed the platform and the chains for a while. Eventually, he discerned that the transmission array mentioned by the human spirit king was most likely to be located on the platform. With this, Geoffrey immediately jumped towards the platform. The moment he landed and stood on the platform, the 4 chains began emitting dark blue lights. These lights were like water droplets that flowed along the grooves of the platform. The lights coming from the 4 corners gradually streamed in the middle, intertwining and merging. Whoosh! Geoffrey witnessed that the dots of blue light began forming a diamond-shaped array on the ground. Is this the transmission array? He was engrossed as he watched the formation of the array. He was the type of person who was easily amused and was curious about everything. Needless to say, he was deeply intrigued by the deep space. He wanted to see what a higher-grade world would look like. Without any hesitation, Geoffrey immediately stepped in the diamond-shaped array. Whoosh! Suddenly, the transmission array began to glow even more brightly. Then, Geoffrey saw that a beam of light was rising from the array. This beam of light instantly drilled through his arm, leaving a hole the size of a thumb. He noticed that his flesh and bones where the hole appeared had completely vanished. Hey, what's happening? Geoffrey was startled. He wasn't informed about this. But he also realized that he didn't feel any pain even after being drilled by the mysterious beam of light. Swoosh! A few more rays of light rose and drilled through his body. 2 of them pierced through the soles of his feet, and another one bored through his head. Wait a minute, is the transmission array going to split me into countless pieces before I get transported? Geoffrey felt a little scared. This process was a little weird for him. There were holes in his body but he didn't feel any pain. Whoosh, whoosh. Eventually, more and more beams of lights rose and created countless holes in his body. As the number of holes increased, fewer body parts remained intact. After the lights shot through the remaining parts, Geoffrey's entire body disappeared from the array. Then, the same beams of light shot upwards. Geoffrey felt that his body and his consciousness were carried within these lights. After a while, the beams of light finally arrived at their destination. Then, they turned into flesh and blood that eventually formed Geoffrey's original body. When the beams of light had finished restoring Geoffrey's body, he opened his eyes and looked into the distance. Then, he remembered Kincaid's warning. He said that if Geoffrey wouldn't be able to understand the deep space, he had to walk to the right all the time. Currently, more than half of the deep space had already been downgraded, and there were many areas of the main world in it. The nearest area was at the end of the right path. When Geoffrey started looking around, the corners of his mouth curled up, and a proud expression appeared on his face. He could clearly see the circles that formed the deep space. He was finally here, and he had to do everything correctly because everyone's survival depended on him. Chapter 3817, Spiders. Although it was the first time that Geoffrey entered the deep space, he had hunch that he could see this place clearly. He might have acquired this confidence when he entered the abstruse energy world. That was why he was not that surprised when he did see the deep space. Currently, he was in some circular secret room. On the walls of this secret room, several ancient patterns were vividly engraved. However, Jeffrey wasn't able to understand any of these words or markings. He said to go right. Remembering what Kincaid had told him, Jeffrey took a few steps forward and chose to walk along the right side of the passage. Upon treading this path, he saw the other end of the passage was broken. The other end had been downgraded to a 4th grade space. As Kincaid was not sure if Jeffrey could move freely in the deep space, he asked him to walk in this 4th grade space. Now that Jeffrey knew about his ability, he believed he didn't need to choose this kind of broken road. He quickly withdrew from the right passage he was treading earlier and started walking straight towards the road ahead. This was a long and narrow pathway, and its surroundings were paved with transparent bricks. He noticed that each of these bricks was encircled by countless tiny rings that emitted bright lights, which illuminated the entire pathway. If the measurement of the 3rd grade world was to be followed, this passage would be about 3,000 feet long. After a short while, he was finally able to reach its end. As he stepped out of the passage, a dazzling light welcomed him, making him feel a bit dizzy. Eventually, he was able to adapt to the light. Upon looking up, he was instantly shocked by the scene that appeared in front of him. There was a huge golden circle floating in the sky, and it was the one responsible for projecting endless luminous lights in all directions. Is this the sun here in the deep space? The peculiar appearance of the scene greatly shocked Jeffrey. Although Jeffrey's cultivation base was not that high, his primary senses, and especially his vision and hearing, had been significantly enhanced due to all his experiences over the years. It could be said that he was no longer inferior to the powerful masters in the chaos. Only half of the circular sun was still intact, while the other half was already broken. The scattered golden fragments had turned into ribbon-like objects that still released heat and light. Only half of the sun has been downgraded. Is it because the power of the downgrader wasn't enough? Jeffrey murmured to himself. After averting his gaze from the sun, Jeffrey continued to look straight ahead. Then, a huge wheel-shaped building appeared in his sight. He quickly noticed that he was at the edge of the wheel. Before coming to the deep space, Kincaid had a long talk with Jeffrey. From that, Jeffrey learned that this wheel-shaped building was called the Sky Wheel City by the Four Spirit sect, and it was supposed to be the most magnificent building in all of the deep space. Most of the digging work by the Four Spirit sect in the deep space was carried out around the Sky Wheel City. The structure of that place is extremely complicated. We've attempted countless times, but we've never been close to the center of the Sky Wheel City. Once you get to the deep space, I urge you to set that place as your goal. This was what Kincaid told Jeffrey before he set out. I wonder if I could find that elder whose surname is Shui. Jeffrey pursed his lips as he stared at the odd-looking building. Although he accepted this task willingly, he just realized that the information and tips given by the human spirit king were too little. Even if the Four Spirits sect spent a long time in the deep space, it still wasn't enough for them to fully grasp the mystery of the place. As for Jeffrey, he could gain a better understanding of it once he saw and experienced the place. Still unsure of what he exactly needed to do, Jeffrey continued walking towards the center of the Sky Wheel City. While walking, he remembered that he was carrying the hopes of the human race, the human spirits, and the entire chaos. However, even though this was such a huge burden, he was actually very passionate about it. In fact, he was so happy that he became such an important figure. Meanwhile, Jeffrey observed that dozens of huge paths branched out from the center of the Sky Wheel City and were connected to the outer edge of the wheel-shaped building. Seeing this, he just randomly walked through one of these paths. Since he entered the Sky Wheel City, Jeffrey had been very careful and on high alert. He was afraid that something strange would suddenly appear, so he needed to be vigilant. He clearly knew that even the vicious beasts in the chaos could defeat him. When he was in the abstruse energy world, he was also overwhelmed by the things that attacked him there. Thus, he was aware that the monsters of the deep space could only be stronger and more terrifying than the ones that he already encountered. If he wasn't careful enough, he might be killed on the spot. However, after walking for about an hour, the surroundings still remained quiet, especially on the huge and wide passages. He couldn't hear anything besides himself. Because of this, the fear in his mind and heart gradually dissipated, and he started walking more briskly. Zia can't even move an inch in the abstruse energy world. What would happen if he entered this world? I think it would be horrible if he was suddenly dragged into this world, Jeffrey thought to himself as he remembered what they went through before. However, even if he was able to move freely, it still took him more than 2 months to go up and down the pillar, even without the statues blocking his way. Rustle. As Jeffrey continued walking and was a bit lost in his thoughts, he suddenly heard a strange sound. It seemed like the sound of sand falling on a piece of board. He had already been quite relaxed for a while, but with this sound, he couldn't help but stop on his tracks and wear a suspicious look on his face. As he looked around, he found nothing. Is it just my illusion? Jeffrey shook his head and continued to walk forward, but he was now on high alert again. Then, he heard the rustling sound once more. This time, since he was already on guard, he heard the sound very clearly. He was able to pinpoint that the sound came from the back of the passage. However, the passage itself was hanging in the air, so he couldn't see what it looked like on the other side. Nervous at what might happen, he started rushing forward and didn't dare to look back. Rustle, rustle. As Jeffrey ran faster, he also noticed that the speed of the rustling sound also increased. It seemed that the creature on the other side of the passage was following him all this time. As he heard this, fear easily crept beneath his skin and cast a shadow on his heart. He wasn't able to think clearly, so he just continued to speed up. Rustle, rustle, rustle. As Jeffrey moved further, the rustling sound that he heard from the back of the passage became denser. He realized that at this point, more and more creatures must have joined in chasing him. After running for a few miles, the rustling sound was already getting closer and closer. For the first time, Jeffrey dared to look at the two sides of the passage. His face immediately turned ghastly pale at what he saw. Black sticks as thick as fingers appeared on both sides of the passage. It turned out that the rustling sound was caused by these black sticks rubbing the ground. On the other end of these black sticks, there were also some pie-shaped beings with sharp teeth embedded in them. Are these spiders? The appearance of the creatures sent a strong shiver down his spine. These creatures were indeed very similar to spiders, but their legs were much thinner, and their bodies were also smaller. Their appearance was just so bizarre, making them look creepier and more alarming. Damn it, the human spirit king lied to me. Jeffrey couldn't help but shout in anxiousness. Kincaid spent 4 hours talking to him about the deep space, but not once did he mention the existence of these dreadful monsters. However, the truth was he couldn't blame Kincaid. The current situation in the deep space was very similar to that in the abstruse energy world. After an incomplete downgrading, the powerful beings that once ruled and lurked in the deep space had all perished. Of course, even the weakest creatures had also been eliminated. However, it was like a gradual evolution that happened through the passage of time. After more than 1,000 chaotic eras, some deviant things slowly developed and appeared in the deep space that was supposed to be a lifeless land. These spider-like beings were one of them. Rustle. One of the spider-like creatures suddenly rushed towards Jeffrey, and its thin black legs swiftly stabbed towards him. Fortunately, Jeffrey was agile enough to avoid the attack. But even before he could land on the ground, he suddenly felt a piercing pain in his chest. As he looked down, he saw that a thin black leg was protruding out of his chest. He was apparently stabbed from his back. Soon after, he felt that his body was being lifted up in the air. Chapter 3818, Selecting. There was no room for Jeffrey to resist. Even if there were, he wasn't strong enough. After swaying around in the air for a while, he was thrown on the back of a spider. Although his chest had been pierced, the wound was not fatal. He somersaulted and tried to break free from the spider. He almost succeeded too, but right before he could break free, the sharp teeth on the back of the spider expanded outwards and formed a cage that imprisoned him. He could move about very slightly now, but could not break free. After Jeffrey was captured, most of the spiders scattered towards the back of the path. However, the one that had captured him ran forwards with its long legs. Jeffrey knew that he had to break free. After stopping the bleeding from the wound on his chest, he stretched out his hands and grabbed two of the spider's teeth, trying to break them apart. However, as soon as the power burst out from his hands, the teeth suddenly turned red. And instantly, as if 2 pieces of red-hot soldering iron had scalded his hands, he quickly let go of them. It was as if he had grabbed a solid fire. Great, I can't leave now, Jeffrey sulked, rubbing his hands helplessly. In the abstruse energy world, he had been rather lucky and had not encountered any danger. Even while facing the most troublesome bronze statues, all he had to do was lure them down and let Zia kill them. This was the first time that he was facing these unknown creatures all by himself. He looked calm on the outside, but in fact, he was extremely flustered. His only comfort was the fact that the spider had only trapped him and not swallowed him whole in a single gulp. Furthermore, the spider was heading towards the center of the Sky Wheel City, and its speed was 10 times faster than his own. Rustle, rustle, rustle. To the naked eye, the Sky Wheel City did not seem so far away, but the path was actually quite long. It took 10 hours even for the spider to cover half the distance. After a full day and night's journey, the spider finally got close to the center of the city. Jeffrey himself would have needed at least 10 days to cover this path. The spider had indirectly helped him shorten the voyage, but he was not happy at all. While nearing the city center, the spider proceeded towards a large, arched building and entered inside. Inside, Jeffrey saw many spiders, all of whom were carrying all sorts of creatures on their backs, and slowly moving forward in a queue. The spider in front of Jeffrey was carrying a huge bug on its back. The bug kept on struggling, but was unable to escape from the sharp teeth. Its body would occasionally touch the sharp teeth, and get scalded in the process. Further ahead was a spider carrying a little monster with very long hands, legs, and tail. The monster was sitting quietly in the cage, staring at Jeffrey with a faint smile on his face. Jeffrey frowned, ignored the little monster, and then continued to look at the other trapped creatures. The creatures and entities that thrived in the deep space were quite mysterious and incomprehensible in the eyes of creatures from 3rd grade and 4th grade worlds. In fact, even their forms were indescribable. However, in Jeffrey's eyes, these creatures were somewhat simple. Most of the creatures that had been sent here were very primitive. The only ones that looked a bit intelligent was the little monster. The spiders in the long line moved forward slowly, and Jeffrey felt uneasy. The spiders were definitely up to something. He didn't know what kind of danger he was going to encounter. Once the spiders had moved a certain distance, Jeffrey saw a triangular platform in front of the line. There was an incision of about 3 feet at the bottom of the platform, and the spiders would perfectly fit inside it, putting the prey in the cages on their backs into the triangular platform. When Jeffrey was concentrating on observing the triangular platform, he suddenly saw a flash of golden light and heard a strange scream from the platform. Then a spider retreated from the platform. The prey on its back had disappeared completely, leaving nothing but a pile of ashes behind. The spider dumped the black ashes on the ground and then left calmly. Oh no, that is bad. Jeffrey's mind went blank when he saw this. What on earth did these spiders want to do? Were they capturing these creatures from thousands of miles away just to burn them to ashes? That seemed unlikely. One spider after another entered the triangular platform to verify Jeffrey's judgment. With every flash of golden light, the prey on the back of a spider would be burnt to ashes. Very soon after that, it was the little monster's turn. The little monster seemed quite calm, and there was a constant smile on his distinctive face throughout the whole process. He is still smiling even though it is certain he is going to die, Jeffrey remarked to himself, gritting his teeth. However, after the little monster was sent in, there was no golden flash from the triangular platform. The spider that was carrying him retreated, and he was safe and sound. When he came out, the monster looked at Jeffrey with an even brighter smile. He even stretched out his hands and made a gesture that seemed like cutting one's neck repeatedly. He was also making a howling sound. The gesture might have been provocative, or it might have been a greeting, but Jeffrey was elated in any case. He had finally seen a creature come out alive. This meant that there was a slim chance of survival while inside the triangular platform. Jeffrey still had a chance to live. Wrestle, wrestle, wrestle. Next, it was the turn of the bug in front of Jeffrey. A few seconds after the bug was sent in, the golden light flashed again, and then the spider came out with ashes on its back. Okay, my turn. Jeffrey took a deep breath and got ready. When he was taken into the triangular platform, a huge mirror appeared in front of him. There were 15 small cubes arranged neatly on the left side of the mirror, and only one on the right side. The 16th one seemed to be a corner piece of the large cube that the 15 other ones were trying to form. This is a test. Jeffrey was stunned for a moment. Then he quickly moved the cube on the right side to the left, forming a complete cube. After that, the scene in the mirror changed abruptly. This time also, several cubes were laid out on the mirror. They were a bit more than a dozen in number. Jeffrey thought for a while and then rearranged them into a pattern. After that, the scene in the mirror changed again. This time, several cubes and round blocks were mixed together, and Jeffrey knew that he only needed to separate them to pass this round. After he completed the 3 puzzles, the scene in the mirror disappeared, and it became blank. Jeffrey was very nervous. The 3 questions had all been very simple, but he didn't know if he had passed the test. If the golden light flashed, he would directly turn into ashes. It was not until the spider that was carrying him began to slowly move that he heaved a heavy sigh of relief. He had passed through one very big hurdle. Although he was still trapped, escaping the jaws of death felt exhilarating. The spiders capture their prey and then select the intelligent ones among them. Those who don't pass the test are burned to a crisp, and the intelligent ones are allowed to live. Jeffrey thought, feeling much more relieved. If the spiders were selecting intelligent creatures so creatively, it meant that they themselves possessed intelligence. This meant that he could communicate with them. And no matter what they were going to do, as long as he could communicate with them, he didn't need to worry. After the test, the spider carried Jeffrey out of the arched building, and descended a flight of stairs that led to a huge underground space. Now there were cages on either side of the space in which all sorts of strange creatures were trapped. They had already passed the test presumably, so naturally possessed enough intelligence. When Jeffrey was carried in, he attracted the attention of all of those creatures. Some of the monsters even greeted him through the fences by letting out strange screams of excitement. Jeffrey didn't know what they were trying to say, so he simply ignored them. After the spider found an empty cage, it stuffed Jeffrey inside and the door was shut. Chapter 3819, 8 Diagrams Lock. The space inside the cage was very limited. It was barely enough just for a person to sit with his legs crossed. Inside the cage, Jeffrey tightly grabbed the fence with both hands and looked intently at his surroundings. At this point, his mind was in a mess. He didn't know what was going to happen to him. From what he could see, he assumed that there were probably thousands of creatures being held in the underground space. The creatures came in different forms and sizes, and they were also speaking in various undecipherable languages. "I'm not sure, but it seems like these creatures only possess little intelligence," Jeffrey murmured to himself as he observed the creatures around him. "What the hell is this place? Why did they catch me?" Although Jeffrey was indeed smart, he was far from being as determined as his father. He could be ambitious and confident at times, but once he encountered even minor setbacks, he would easily become frustrated. Coo, coo. Diagonally opposite to Jeffrey's position, a white bird was constantly letting out loud cries while furiously flapping his wings. He had been doing this for more than an hour now. "Oh, shut up, it's so annoying." Bang! Jeffrey shouted in extreme irritation as he punched the fence of the cage. As the bird sensed Jeffrey's hostility, he stopped screaming for a few seconds. Then, suddenly, his eyes flashed with an ominous green light. When Jeffrey incidentally met his eyes, he instantly felt a crushing pain in his head as if he were hit by a heavy hammer. He felt like his skull was being split open, that it almost made him faint. Coo, coo, coo. Then, the white bird started violently flapping his wings again. His cry was even louder than before. Jeffrey sat down for a long time, holding his aching head. After a while, the pain gradually subsided. He sat properly and helplessly said, "These creatures are so aggressive. They may be a bit intelligent, but they still look like a bunch of idiots." Just now, the questions that appeared in the mirror were very simple. Maybe they took the cultural barriers of different races into consideration and only arranged a simple test. Even though they passed the test, Jeffrey realized that these creatures possessed inferior intelligence than humans. Wallowing in despair, Jeffrey's eyes wandered into the cage in front of him, where the little monster he had seen before was being held. In contrast to the white bird, this little monster didn't make a ruckus. Instead, he climbed onto the railing and stared intently at Jeffrey with his black eyes. He wore a strange and creepy smile on his face as if he had taken an interest in Jeffrey. "Why the hell does he keep on staring at me?" Jeffrey turned around as he complained. He covered his head with both his hands and tried to close his eyes. Although he no longer needed any sleep after cultivating to his current level, he felt the need to isolate himself from his surroundings. He didn't want to see or hear them. As the night passed, the noise produced by the monsters didn't cease even for a minute. When the door of the underground space opened again, they immediately heard rustling sounds coming from beyond the door. Jeffrey immediately stood up, pressed his head against the fence and saw that numerous spiders were coming in one after another. Then, one of the spiders stopped in front of Jeffrey's cage. He noticed that at the back of the spider, it was carrying a pile of wooden blocks and 3 square wooden frames. What is it this time? A 7-piece puzzle. When Jeffrey was still in the Cloud Hall, he used to play the 7-piece puzzle. Letitia had hired someone to specifically make and customize the blocks. After taking a quick glance, Jeffrey reached out his hand and picked out a few blocks to combine them together. In just a second, he was able to use all the 7 blocks to fill the first square wooden frame. "Come on, this is so easy," he thought. Then, he used 12 more blocks to fill the bigger square wooden frame, and 16 more blocks to fill the biggest one. Well, compared to the earlier one, this one is a little more difficult. This test might need the level of intelligence that an ordinary 8-year-old human possesses. As Jeffrey quickly finished, his gaze fell on the white bird that was about to take the test. In his mind, he had no doubt that this creature possessed great strength. Just his malevolent stare was able to give Jeffrey a severe headache. However, with this test, his intelligence would definitely be tried. The white bird stretched his head out of the fence and began picking up blocks to put into the wooden frame. However, no matter how much he tried, he wasn't able to piece the blocks together. The blocks were either one piece more or less. The white bird couldn't even finish the smallest frame. Thus there was no way that he could accomplish the bigger ones. He seemed to know what might happen to him once he failed to solve the puzzle. The speed at which he picked and rearranged the blocks became faster and faster. At the same time, Jeffrey saw that the anxiety was growing in his eyes. The white bird was getting impatient and frustrated as he couldn't solve the puzzle no matter how hard he tried. Coo, 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 the white bird stretched out his neck and started screaming in agitation. With a sneer on his face, Jeffrey said, "Ha, you deserve it. Let's see if you could dare to glare at me again." This time, the captives were given about an hour to finish the test. As the time was up, the spiders carried unfinished frames away and left the underground space immediately after. The underground space that was in an uproar just a few minutes ago suddenly became quiet. As the test ended, most of the monsters knew what was waiting for them. Whoosh! Without any warning, a muffled sound rang out in one of the cages, followed by a flash of golden light. In the blink of an eye, the monster in that cage was burned to ashes. Whoosh! Whoosh! Immediately after, a wave of golden lights shone one after another. The muffled shrieks of the monsters were heard throughout the place. In a few moments, several monsters were burned to death inside their cages. At this moment, the white bird clearly knew what was going to happen to him. He struggled madly in the cage, desperately trying to escape from it. His wings suddenly turned into a bright and rigid weapon that constantly slashed the fence. However, the fence was made from an exceptional solid material. Even with the white bird's extraordinary strength, his wings didn't even leave a dent or scratch on it. Whoosh! As the golden light flashed in the white bird's cage, he was instantly charred, and only a few of his white feathers remained floating out of his cage. Upon seeing the miserable death of the white bird, Jeffrey wasn't satisfied at all. Instead, he also panicked because he didn't know for sure that he was already safe. Even if he had finished all those puzzles, if the spiders had somehow made a mistake in checking their records, then he was still doomed. He could imagine the unjust death that he would receive. However, after a few moments, all of the golden lights began to dim. That was the only time that Jeffrey felt relieved. It meant that the purging of the creatures who failed the test was finally done. Phew, I passed. Jeffrey couldn't help but let out a deep sigh. Immediately after, his gaze stumbled upon the cage of the little monster from before. It seemed that he was still safe, and he was staring at him with a playful look as his tail wagged constantly. Jeffrey ignored him as he didn't have time for his antics. Instead, he started counting the creatures that were left. From what he saw, he concluded that about 1 out of 10 creatures had survived, meaning that the failure rate was about 90%. He adjudicated that the remaining monsters must have possessed at least an average level of intelligence. He also determined that these kinds of tests would probably continue, and he just wanted them to be over. However, what he couldn't figure out was the real intention behind these tests. If they wanted to select creatures with high intelligence, was this kind of method necessary? For the first 2 tests, Jeffrey easily dealt with them, but he worried that if the tests' difficulty increased over time, there was no way to know for sure if he could pass them all. However, right now, he had no choice but to take them and go on until the end. About 24 hours later, the spiders appeared in the underground space again. This time, they were carrying 6 pieces of iron with different sizes and unique shapes. As soon as Jeffrey saw them, his anxious expression gradually relaxed, and a faint smile appeared at the corners of his mouth. The 8 diagrams lock, the pieces of iron were intertwined in a mortise and tenon structure. Even an adult would have a bit difficulty unlocking them. Fortunately, Jeffrey had been fond of playing the 8 diagrams lock since he was a child, and thus it should be pretty easy for him to accomplish this test. Just when he was about to begin, the little monster suddenly made a scene by quickly grabbing the 8 diagrams lock and raising it towards Jeffrey. With a single gentle touch, he was able to unlock it instantly. As soon as it was done, the little monster stared at Jeffrey with a defiant and mocking expression. Jeffrey couldn't help but scoff as he thought how ridiculous it was. Is he trying to provoke me by showing off his skill for something like this? All of the creatures in the 5th grade world had immeasurable strength, or at least, they were much stronger than Jeffrey. Every single one of them could easily take him down, but right now, they were held against their will and competing in these children's games. Chapter 3820, Intelligent Creature. The little monster acted swiftly and smoothly. He seemed very capable of unlocking the 8 diagrams locks. Sure enough, he quickly found a knack to do that. After a few minutes, he successfully unlocked the 8 diagrams locks. Then, he eyed Jeffrey curiously, as though he wanted to size up his capabilities. Because of 2 prior experiences, Jeffrey was now able to maintain his composure. In fact, he acted as though he was in no rush. He even observed the other monsters for a while before reaching out his hands to the 8 diagrams lock. He grabbed each side of the 8 diagrams lock with both hands and gently twisted it, unlocking it with ease. Then he unlocked the second lock, the third, the fourth. Once he'd successfully unlocked all 6 8 diagrams locks, Jeffrey smiled at the little monster in front of him. Then, he began to reconfigure the pieces of the locks. He paired the biggest 2 pieces of 8 diagrams locks with the smallest 2 pieces. Then the middle-sized ones were pieced and paired with them. All in all, a strange shape was formed. There were endless permutations to the combinations of the pieces of the 8 diagrams locks. As Jeffrey's flexible hands continued to move nimbly, these 8 diagrams locks seemed to come to life, changing shape constantly. After Jeffrey formed a large structure with all the 8 diagrams locks, he put it to the side and gently flicked at it with his finger. Immediately, the structure collapsed into small pieces again. The little monster looked at Jeffrey's series of movements, his eyes revealing a look of surprise. It never occurred to him that this thing could be toyed with like this. Jeffrey gestured towards the little monster and leaned against the side of the cage. After their time was up, the other losers in the underground space began to be wiped out again. Plop, 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 a series of sounds rang out, indicating that another batch of monsters had been eliminated. Jeffrey's eyes swept throughout the cages as he did a rough head count. It seemed only a small number of monsters were left. On the third day, a new round of test began. This time, they were asked to unlock an exquisite chain made of 100 rings. Jeffrey had never seen a chain of 100 rings before. Fortunately for him, he was very smart. After studying it for a while, he figured it out. In no time, he had unraveled it easily. In comparison, the little monster on the other side scratched his head and ears, as if it was very difficult for him to unfasten this strange chain. "You find it difficult, right?" Jeffrey called out to him with a shrug. However, while the little monster was not stupid, he was also determined. Although the chain of 100 rings was complicated, he tried again and again. It took him more than an hour to find out the technique of untying the chain, but eventually he separated the rings, one by one. When the little monster unfastened the last ring, he let out a sigh of relief. Then, he turned to eye Jeffrey, intrigued. It seemed that now, he viewed Jeffrey as a worthy opponent. Plop, 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 time was over. Jeffrey could hear the sound of more and more monsters being eliminated. There weren't many monsters that had survived before, and now the sounds were sparser. Then, 3 spiders emerged from the entrance to the underground space. One of them opened the cage and plucked Jeffrey out, locking him to its back. The little monster was also treated the same way. In addition to the 2 of them left in the underground space, there was a 10-foot-tall black ape, which was also locked on the back of a spider. Are there only 3 of us left? Sitting on the back of the spider, Jeffrey realized only now that the underground space was very empty. Were all the other creatures eliminated? How terrifying. Rustle, rustle, the 3 spiders carried them, continuing deeper into the space. At the very end of the underground space, there were layers of stairs, on which 3 spiders were slowly climbing. The black ape curled up on the spider's back in silence. The little monster looked around briefly before eventually locking his eyes on Jeffrey. He was very interested in him. Jeffrey was also used to the little monster's strange behavior. He just pretended not to notice it and decidedly closed his eyes, deep in thought. However, at this moment, he heard a raspy voice. "What's your name?" When Jeffrey heard the little monster's words, his eyes popped open in surprise. The little monster was speaking Sanskrit. The Sanskrit words of the 4-spirit sect, nonetheless. Zen, Zia, and the others naturally wouldn't have understood if they had heard that. Then again, Zen could decipher the words with the help of the heavenly obsession civilization. But for Jeffrey, he didn't need to decipher the words. He could understand the Sanskrit words the instant he heard or read them. However, the Sanskrit words belonged to the 4-spirit sect. How did the little monster in the deep space know it? Could it be that the creatures in the deep space also communicated with each other by using the Sanskrit words? Impossible. Jeffrey had a full understanding of the Sanskrit words already. The Sanskrit words were the culture created by the 4-spirit sect, it was not passed down from the deep space. Jeffrey squeezed his throat and made a series of guttural sounds. The pronunciation of Sanskrit was very complicated. Zen had even invited a group of people to sing in order to speak in Sanskrit. Although Jeffrey knew how to read Sanskrit words, it was too difficult for him to pronounce them all by himself. Thus it took him a while before he was able to utter what he wanted to say. "Can you speak Sanskrit?" The little monster nodded and replied in Sanskrit. "And you also can." "This is nonsense," Jeffrey thought to himself. Aloud, he asked, "Who taught you?" The little monster pointed at Jeffrey and gestured with his hands. "A human spirit." "A human spirit? Is his surname Shui?" Jeffrey's eyes widened with surprise. During those 4 hours of exchange between Jeffrey and Kincaid, the latter only worried about 2 things. First, he had no idea whether Elder Shui was really alive or not. Second, he wondered whether Jeffrey would find him. Despite the little monster not seeming too fluent in Sanskrit, Jeffrey's heart sparked with hope. It was very likely that Elder Shui taught the little monster how to speak Sanskrit. If that was the case, then his luck had taken a turn for the better. The little monster tried his best to understand Jeffrey's words. After a long while, he finally nodded and said, "Yes." Elder Shui was still alive. Jeffrey was so excited that he couldn't help but ask urgently, "Where is he? Can you take me to him?" "He's outside." The little monster pointed in a direction. "We can't go out yet." "We can't go out?" Jeffrey echoed in surprise. "Well, we won't be able to get out forever," the little monster said with a nod. This news disappointed Jeffrey greatly. All this time, he had been under the impression that if he'd passed a few more rounds of tests, he could finally obtain his freedom. After he heard the little monster's words, his hopes were dashed. "Why?" Jeffrey frowned deeply, his expression darkening. "Only the most intelligent one here can turn the situation around." "Are you that smart?" the little monster chanted almost playfully. "Only the smartest one can reverse the situation." Jeffrey turned these words over in his head. Along the way, there were intelligence tests, and it was indeed like they were trying to select the most intelligent being. However, this so-called intelligence actually had a limit. No matter how smart one was, they wouldn't be able to resist against the one with the strongest power. Jeffrey felt that he was smarter than the little monster and the black ape, but in terms of strength, he definitely paled in comparison. What on earth had happened in the Skywheel City? Why were there tests to select the most intelligent creature?